The Innkeeper by Life Sketcher. Chapter 781 Anger. Even as Lex fell through the levels, a frown didn't leave his face. Something extremely unusual was happening on this planet, and he was caught in the middle. To a certain degree, he could understand things getting out of hand. After all, a dragon had mysteriously died here, so there was one mystery entity to account for. Then there was the group of foreigners who, through some unidentified means, discovered the dragon was dead and even spread the news. As unlikely as this was, it still remained within the realm of possibilities. The several groups that Lex fought while looting also made sense, since the news of a dead dragon would surely bring about an endless tide of looters, pirates, and cultivators hoping to find a lucky encounter. What did not make sense, however, was that whoever was up on those ships was shooting directly at the castle. Even if the looters got caught in an unwanted fight, they should have tried their best to prevent anyone from entering the castle lest their loot be stolen first. But whoever that was up there in the ships up in the air, they did not care about the dragon's horde at all. Lex couldn't be sure if they were targeting the looters, the abominations, or just everyone, but they were out for blood. More importantly, they were actually a threat to Lex, because while he could face an individual head-on, even he had to watch out for weapons for mass destruction for now. If he could help it, none of that would be his problem. But based on the sounds of the pursuing abominations, he would have to bear with it for a bit longer. Or not. The moment he reached the end of the hole, he used Imperial Shield to put up barriers right above him, blocking the tunnel and preventing the abominations from reaching him. Their unusual ability to freeze spirit energy made them particularly potent against his shields, but if Lex put enough of them up he would be able to delay them till he returned. With his plan decided, he did exactly that and began the process for his return. But just as he started, he sensed danger once again. The end of the hole did not connect to any of the floors of the dragon's horde, so Lex had nowhere to dodge to. He could only take the attack head-on. As fast as he could, he erected countless shields right before him and held out his hands to block the incoming attack, using impervious hands to actually protect himself for once. He had been using the technique for its various other uses for so long that it seemed like he had forgotten its original use, which was to block overwhelming attacks. After all, when using impervious hands, his hands were literally 10 times more durable than his own body. Now taking into consideration how tough his body was to begin with, it made sense that he had barely been able to survive an immortal's casual attack while using it. He did not see the attack coming, for the only thing in his view in the tunnel was a mountain of icy abominations, pressed up against one another as they tried to break his shields. The next second, even with his keen senses, he barely saw a black figure tear through the abominations, rip through his shields like they were nothing and smash into the ground next to him. He had managed to avoid a direct impact, but that did not mean he did not suffer. A shockwave of energy crashed into him, nearly shattering his impervious hands, but somehow he held on by a hair's breadth. Yet even so Lex felt his hands aching and all the bones in his arms felt like they had been put on an anvil and hammered. His chest felt tight and some of his muscles were sore, but remarkably he had managed to survive without any visible wounds. The shockwave had, however, thrown and embedded him into the wall, while the tunnel now reached deeper, but still did not connect to any other floor. Lex groaned. Suffering artillery strikes was not nearly as fun as it sounded. Fortunately, all the abominations had been killed, so there was nothing more to attract anyone's attention within the tunnel. He finally had an opportunity to leave. But what Lex did not realize was how advanced the tracking systems of the ships in the air were. Besides the simple visual and heat signatures, the ship could also track spiritual energy signatures. At that moment, one of the crew members of the ship that had previously shot near Lex twice was looking at a screen that was clearly outlining Lex's figure in the wall. "That's 2 shots he survived, Elquin," the man said to his colleague sitting beside him. "That means you owe me 200 spirit stones." "Double or nothing, I get him with the next one," the colleague named Elquin said with gritted teeth. As was his habit, he spent all his money before going into battle in case he dies, so he did not have the 200 spirit stones to pay. "Hell nah, you think I'm an idiot? I know what you're going to use next." I want my 200, I'll be waiting for you after the fight. Elquin glared at Lex's figure on screen with pure hatred in his heart, as if Lex had been the one trying to kill him instead of the other way around. Let's see if you can survive this tough guy, he said, and activated the ship's laser weapon. According to the spiritual energy readings, he could tell the figure was in the golden core realm, so he wasn't worried about accidentally antagonizing an immortal. As for a nascent soul cultivator? Although they were strong, they still couldn't fight against a warship alone. Lex, who had just begun the return process once more, suddenly felt danger one more time. Due to the angle, he was not clearly visible from the top of the tunnel, but he could see a thin, red laser pointing at the ground right in front of him. The attack came too fast. Lex had only just perceived the danger and seen the laser, and not even had a moment to put up any shields or use any techniques, when his entire world became red. He could not see the tunnel, he could not see the walls around him, or even his own body. All he could see was the color red, and over every inch of his body Lex felt a raging heat. It felt as if he had entered a seething inferno, melting his very being. Pain could no longer describe the sudden feeling that enveloped him as he felt in an instant his entire body cooking. Time seemed to dilate, and though he knew not even a millionth of a second had passed, he felt like he had been tortured for an eternity. Not even the dragons might had tortured him like this. Then the world seemed to take on an entirely different shade of red. This time it was not because of the laser that was still cooking him, or the walls that were melting around him. No, this time Lex was seeing red because he was infuriated. He roared, not from pain but from anger. Alongside his outburst, his aura burst out as well, and for the first time Lex employed domination, although he did not realize it. His wrath, his oppression, his might all twisted the world itself around him, and the laser that was shooting straight seemed to bend away from him. Or maybe he was using his spatial affinity alongside domination. At that moment, Lex himself did not know what he was doing, as his mind was completely occupied by the smoldering rage that seemed fit for a dragon almost. In his right eye, the image of a broken sword was reflected, eerily similar to the sword he had broken inside the horde earlier. He looked up and immediately knew which ship was the one that had been targeting him. I was just trying to leave you, fucker. But since you want to pick a fight, let's fight, he roared. Surprisingly, despite the devastating attack he suffered, not only was he not hurt, his clothes and his equipment remained unharmed as well. Lex leaped out of the tunnel, which was literally melting all around him, and summoned one of the artillery shells he looted from the ships earlier. He had no idea how to actually use this thing, so he used it as a canvas for a self-exploding array and threw it at the ship with full force. Since he had been jumping in the air when he threw it, he could not use all his might. Even so, there was a sonic boom as the shell flew out. The ship seemed to have a barrier around it which blocked the initial crash. Then Lex's arrays blew up. Next, Lex's anger was suddenly quenched, and the image of the sword in his eye vanished as a new threat of death gripped his mind. After having suffered from the laser attack, his mind seemed to have already developed a mechanism to react to extreme threats in an instant. Without even realizing what he was doing, Lex used the in-law effect and teleported away. The next moment, the artillery shell, which was special enough to be collected by a dragon that was at the very least a heavenly immortal, detonated. Chapter 782 Skin. Teleporting randomly was not a good idea, especially considering how dangerous the situation was already. As such, when Lex detected the incoming danger, he immediately locked onto the only familiar point, Fenrir's location. Due to their connection, Lex could always feel where the pup was and summon it to himself, but usually he could not do that in reverse. This time, using the in-law effect, he managed to do just that. The moment he reappeared, he found himself, not in the pool of blood, but in one of the empty halls. That was all he had time to do before he felt the change. All sound was muted. It was as if the air itself had vanished and the world itself stopped vibrating. Feeling his sense of dread rising, Lex immediately dismissed Fenrir and let it return to the inn. The world suddenly turned black, and Lex could see absolutely nothing, even with his left eye. He closed his eyes so as to not dwell on what was happening and immediately used hardened, impervious hands and began wrapping himself in imperial shields. The next thing that happened was the loss of sensation. First the world had become mute, then all light had disappeared and now his body could feel nothing. Even the sense of impending doom vanished. But he knew that the crisis was far from over. Since Lex could not tell what was happening, he had no idea that his body had begun to slowly float upwards, alongside everything else. The walls around him had crumbled and all the debris was mixing together. The blood that had been in the pool in the adjacent room floated across the air, and it seemed like it almost wanted to splash onto Lex, but all it could do was cover his barriers. The lava, which had been falling down in the main hall, was now falling upwards, and it too seemed to approach Lex, yet it was once again blocked by his shields, and all it could do was slowly envelope them. An invisible wood ring suddenly became visible, stuck inside Lex's shields. It vibrated, almost as if out of frustration, as it tried to reach the blood and lava, but it had no strength. A small crack appeared in the ring and it stopped vibrating, as if it had lost all its energy. Lex remained oblivious to all of this since he could not feel anything. In fact, the only thing he had left were his thoughts. Time was unusual when there was no stimulus at all. Lex had stopped trying to create more barriers once he lost all sensation, because he could not be sure if he was using the technique correctly. If, due to his loss of all awareness, he channeled his spirit energy incorrectly, he could suffer severe damage, which was something he could not handle right now. But unbeknownst to him, barriers were forming around him still as more and more lava surrounded him, trying to get to the wooden ring that was hovering around him. This continued until he formed a massive, floating ball of lava approximately 20 feet, 6 meters, in diameter. As the ball kept rising, it eventually emerged from the debris that the mountain range had turned into, and began to rapidly cool down, solidifying into a shape suspiciously similar to an egg. The planet around the egg was absolutely devastated. The detonation of the artillery shell did not result in an actual explosion, but had instead unleashed a devastating curse. If Lex could see the situation around him, he would discover that destruction caused by the curse was eerie and unnerving. Everything, from the planet to the ships to the Frygles, icy abominations, and all the foreigners who had been exposed to the curse seemed to have come undone. They were not disintegrating into finer, smaller particles. Instead, everything that they were composed of was coming undone. The ships, for example, had been perfectly deconstructed down to the last nut and bolt in such a fashion that a knowledgeable engineer could rebuild it perfectly. The Frygles were coming apart as if they were not living beings, but constructed robots. Their skins were separate from the muscles, which had been separated from their blood vessels, which had been separated from the blood itself. Each tooth, each fingernail, each scale, and every other part of their body had been perfectly removed without causing any harm during the removal process. The dwarfs, elves, and the abominations had been deconstructed in a similar fashion. Even the planet, under the influence of the curse, was slowly and systematically being separated. Each mineral in the soil was being separated, each ore perfectly purified so that each metal it contained was separated. Slowly and steadily, the effects of the curse were spreading deeper and deeper into the planet, but for some odd reason, when the curse tried to penetrate the egg Lex was in, it was being greatly resisted. Meanwhile, Lex, who had no idea what was happening, tried to initiate his return to the inn. If something happened, it would disrupt the teleportation, but there was no harm in trying. A few seconds later, the egg disappeared. The planet, on the other hand, continued to suffer the curse's effects. Everyone in the immediate vicinity of the detonation was already dead, but those some distance away were still alive, for the moment. Deep within the castle, deeper even than the supposed last level that Lex had found the dragon on, the king of the Frygles was accompanying his son. As it turned out, it was not a bodyguard protecting the child, but the king himself. The reason why this previously unfavored child of the king was suddenly getting so much attention was simple. The royal family had long since known that the dragon had died, because the moment of the dragon's death, he had transmitted unto this child secret information. The royal family's job now was to aid the child until it could complete the mission given to it by the dragon. This is the opportunity we have been waiting for. Spreading the news of the dragon's death really was a good idea. Look at all the chaos those foreigners have caused. That thing's attention is finally diverted towards preventing the destruction of the planet. It will not notice at all if we leave, said the child, his voice a lot more confident than would have been expected from one of his age. You are wise, the king responded, showing no emotion on his face. No one could decipher his thoughts. As if on cue, an unusual power filled with an icy chill rose from the opposite end of the planet and attacked the curse, preventing its spread, but not really eliminating it directly either. Meanwhile, back at the inn, the egg had reappeared in Lex's meditation room right in front of the dragon. The return of all his senses was not immediate, but it happened fairly quickly. First came the feeling of extreme weakness, as if he had not eaten food in years. Although it was not much consolation, at least he was not in agonizing pain. Then came the feeling of suffocation. He had used up all the oxygen within the small area around him. Then came a strange feeling that Lex couldn't really describe. If he had to put it to words, then all he could say was it felt like he was leaking. He moved, and the lack of pain he had just been grateful for vanished. It was not in any one area that he was hurting, it was the surface of his entire body. Suffocated, irritated, and in pain, Lex stretched out and his hands hit a cold, hard surface. For a moment it resisted against Lex, but he ultimately broke it apart and an unusual situation unfolded. In front of the dragon's eyes, an egg seemed to be breaking open, and from within it a skinny, bloody creature emerged. Lex would have used his spirit sense to investigate his situation, but he was too drained to use even that, so when he finally broke open his confines and light finally entered, Lex realized why he was feeling so many peculiar sensations. The skin on his entire body had detached itself from him. Lex was left there, standing in his suit, completely with all his muscles, guts, and flesh exposed. If he were not a cultivator, and if his body were not resilient enough to keep itself together, despite the harsh condition, Lex may have just died right there. In front of him, on the ground, his skin lay on the ground like an old shirt he threw on the floor. Even his hair was still attached to it, making it seem like an extremely creepy yet realistic costume. Lex trembled, for the sight was just too nerve-wracking, before teleporting to the ORR. It could reconstruct any organ, and his skin definitely counted. All the while he was wondering what the hell actually happened. Chapter 783 Ring. Laying inside the organic reconstruction room, ORR, as his skin was slowly being regrown atop his body, Lex's mind was furiously working. It was not just the matter of having his entire skin removed that unnerved him. It was the absurd scale of the fury he felt back on Phrygia that astounded him. No matter what had happened, regardless of how angry Lex ever got, he never lost himself completely in anger. That was not his way of doing things, and with the number of mistakes he made back when he had a tumor, he was very particular about at least trying to anticipate the repercussions of his actions. Slowly, he recalled everything that happened, from the very first moment he arrived on Phrygia. He thought about every action he took and every subsequent reaction. Given that he already knew of Spirit Pull now, all his actions until he arrived at the dragon's hoard seemed logical and natural. He thought about how his greed was stoked upon arriving and seeing all the treasure, especially the mountains of gold. He was not sure if that was a normal, logical reaction anyone would have upon seeing so much gold, or if he had been affected by something else. After thinking about it, Lex could not be certain, but he eventually concluded that his actions then were the result of the influence of his life as a mortal on him. After all, he lived most of his life as a normal person unaware of the cultivation world. In that case, gold was one of the most valuable items available, and though that was not the case anymore, it still had a significant impact on him. He moved on, and slowly and steadily continued to sift through his memories till he finally recalled the instance of the sword breaking. It happened when he was fighting the strange creature which could enter his mind. At the time, due to the immense pressure on him of the fight as well as Dragon's might, he could not spare any thought of the strange aura that enveloped him when the sword broke, but now he had the time. The fact that a sword from within the dragon's collection was so fragile that it would break upon use was strange and suspicious to begin with. The aura it released enveloping him was an even greater flag that something was amiss. He noted that down as the most significant thing, and then continued to go through his memories for any other anomalies. Thinking about it now, he was way too weak to be interfering with immortal-level items, for there was just too much he did not know. Even though he did not find any other significant issues while he went through his memories, there could be countless threats he was not even able to detect. His instincts, to a certain degree, warned him of threats up until the Earth immortal realm, but if it was anything greater, his instincts would either not detect them, or only do so moments before disaster. He needed to be even more careful in the future. He had to investigate his body to see if the aura was still lingering within him in some form, or if it had dissipated. Using his spirit and soul sense, Lex began to thoroughly scan every nook and cranny of his body. As for his instincts, once again they had not warned him of any anomaly. It seemed like just solely relying on his instincts was no longer feasible as he reached a higher level. There had to be some body techniques that focused on fostering and growing them, though. It did not take him long to discover an image of a sword hidden within his soul. It was radiating a sharp, piercing aura that would cut Lex's soul sense if he even got close to it, so there was no way of interacting with it, for now at least. Lex frowned, then sighed. Why did he keep on collecting things inside his body? Those weird inscriptions, the system, the lotus, and now this sword. It was feeling a little crowded. He tried a few more ways of interacting with the sword, but was unable to influence it in any way. With another choice for now, he turned his mind to other things. There was his skin, which had come off on its own. He had no idea how that could have possibly happened, but then considering the fact that he had lost all sensation when it happened, he could not say for sure. It was most likely a result of whatever danger he detected, but it could also be other reasons. With a serious and focused expression, Lex first investigated his removed skin. He used his control over the system to inspect it, and immediately found something amiss. A cracked, wooden ring was weakly rolling towards his skin, as if it had some agenda. He scanned it and discovered something completely unexpected. Name, Pelvalin Uar Bahatnagorjan. Age, 0. Sex, male. Cultivation details, sealed. Species, dragon/soul spirit. Midnight and prestige level, 1. Condition, a severely wounded soul on the verge of death, fused with a newly born treasure spirit to form a new entity. Without a sufficiently strong body to support it, the soul will continuously destroy its carriers until it eventually dies. Remarks, others get grandpas and rings, and you got a newborn baby. The name was extremely familiar to Lex, because that was what the dragon's body was called. The dragon's soul was inside the ring. Not to mention, the ring was very close to the body. Lex almost cursed when he realized how disastrous this could be. If the dragon's soul returned to its body and learned how brazenly Lex had looted it, not to mention how he had cultivated atop its body, he would be a goner. The only redeeming factor for him right now was that the soul's cultivation was sealed. Not bothering about the fact that his skin had not regenerated yet, Lex teleported back out and picked up the ring and studied it. The ring itself was not more than a simple band, though the wood itself looked spectacular and even had a fresh scent wafting from it. The workmanship was spectacular as the ring was extremely smooth. "I know you're in there," Lex said, transmitting his words with his spirit sense. Chapter 784 Bond. There was a heavy silence in the meditation room as a body without any skin, dripping blood all over the floor, gazed at a cracked, wooden ring. Without eyelids to blink, and without any skin to add any expression, his gaze was devastatingly haunting. Lex was already planning on how he would deal with this dragon. Based on what he knew, the dragon would be extremely prideful. That in itself was not an issue, but what he needed to know was if the dragon could unseal its cultivation when it wanted, or if there was some kind of restriction. The longer the silence continued, the heavier the atmosphere became. Lex did not repeat himself even upon noticing a lack of any reaction, for he was well versed in how to create a psychological advantage. Given that he was facing a being as remarkable as a dragon, even if it was only in soul form, he would need every advantage he could get. Finally, after ages, the wooden ring vibrated weakly, and transmitted a message to Lex. My apologies, Senior. I just did not want your shed skin to go to waste. I did not know you still had use for it. The voice was very faint and squeaky, as if a newborn was trying to speak for the first time. Lex was startled, but he immediately came to a conclusion that nearly made him swoon. The system's description stated that within the ring was a new being born from the fusion of the dragon's soul. Did that possibly mean the dragon was dead, and this newborn entity had merely inherited the dragon's name? But he did not want to jump to conclusions yet. Anything was possible. Who are you, and what do you want? Lex asked, his voice still stern. Nothing of his thoughts could be determined from his tone. Senior, I don't know. According to my memories, in my past life my name was Pelvalen Uar Bahatna and I was a mighty dragon. But I don't feel like a dragon. So in this life, have I been born as something new? But no, according to my memories from my previous life, that is not how the afterlife or reincarnation work. Senior, I don't know who I am, but I can tell you what I want. I can feel my body about to break. According to my memories of my past life, I can determine that my body is too weak to support me. If I absorb other things into my body, I should be able to strengthen my body. Lex did not immediately reply, because the conclusion he was coming to was too good to be true. Could this ring have been the treasure that mystery man wanted Lex to find? If so, that would be remarkable. If Lex's theory was correct, the dragon's injured soul had fused with the spirit born in this ring. Whatever the ring's original purpose was, it no longer mattered, for the ring was too weak to support the new spirit and so could not operate properly. But the most important thing was that the spirit had inherited all of the dragon's memories, or at least some of them, and had them available for use. That meant that a vast store of knowledge about the realm, the universe and the higher cultivation levels that Lex was lacking was now available to him, literally on his fingertips. Since Pelvalen was the name you used in your last life, there's no harm in sticking to it now. I cannot give you my skin, Pelvalen, but if you allow me to bond with you, I can provide other materials to you for you to heal yourself. By bonding with it, Lex meant he would try to bond with the treasure. Spirit tech, weapons, and treasures of a higher category could be bonded to a specific user. This way the user had greater and finer control over the treasure's applications, and it could prevent others from stealing or using the item. After all, unless the previous user's bond is removed, someone new cannot bond with it. No problem at all, Senior. Pelvalen responded chipperly. It retained none of the pride and arrogance that it had in its previous life, which greatly relieved Lex. After all, if it was influenced by its memories, it could harbor ulterior motives that would be detrimental to Lex. In fact, he had still not dropped his guard against the ring. Anything could still happen. He did not need to pierce his skin to get blood on the ring, one of the perks of being skinless, so he directly enveloped the ring in his spirit sense and began channeling his spirit energy into it. He would have to leave a mark on the ring, and once the mark was complete his bond would be formed. The mystery man, who was watching everything from within his library, shook his head in an amused fashion. Not only had Lex not gotten the treasure he was talking about, Lex had not even reached the correct belt. But the blame for that, to a degree, probably went on him for not clarifying the location of the treasure. He turned his head to look in the place the actual treasure he meant for Lex was located. Around a pedestal made of bones was a pool of fresh blood. All the others he had sent to get that treasure were already dead, unable to even lay eyes on it. That was also fine, for the bones in their bodies would only be absorbed by the pedestal, making it stronger. The mystery man did not have any evil intentions in sending them there. He did not want to send them to their deaths. He was just a little curious about what that pedestal was there for, as even he could not see through it, for now. Oh well, there's always next time, the man murmured and turned his attention elsewhere. Chapter 785 Dragon Tamer. If someone were to see the situation inside Lex's meditation room, they would think they stumbled onto a scene from a horror movie. A dragon was sitting prone, its reptilian eyes seemingly focused onto what looked like a meat man who was standing in a growing pool of his own blood, while the man's gaze was ever fixed on a wooden ring in his palm. If one observed the spirit energy in the room, they would see that a torrent of spiritual energy was rushing from the man into the ring non-stop. The amount of energy had already long surpassed what a normal human golden core cultivator should have possessed, but the man did not slow down, nor did the ring show any sign of being full. After a few more minutes went by like this, Lex frowned as he realized this was harder than he realized. Whatever this ring was, its level was far beyond his. Bonding a treasure usually relied on a certain amount of spirit energy to create the bond, and that amount depended on the power of the treasure. It went without saying that the higher the level of the treasure, the more energy it required. But if the quality of energy was sufficient, it could also reduce the amount of energy required. Lex had thought that given how unique his affinity was, it might reduce the amount required. But it was clear now that even if the amount required had been reduced, it was way beyond his current capacity. To be fair, any treasure kept by the dragon should not be underestimated, let alone one capable of absorbing a dragon's broken soul. But he was not ready to give up just yet. Without interrupting the process, Lex teleported above the dragon and sat down on his spot on the forehead. He began cultivating, while channeling the gained spirit energy, straight into the ring. The speed of the transmission had slowed down, but like this he could go on much longer. A few minutes went by, and then a dozen. As Lex did not want to interrupt the process, he kept going as even hours passed by. Eventually, Lex entered a bit of a trance as he focused solely on the ring, and noticed that a tiny, almost imperceptible dot had formed on it. That dot was a piece of his mark that would establish his bond. Unwilling to give up on this opportunity, he continued as hours turned into days, and then, into weeks. Although it was not his skin, his body had reacted to his skinless state by forming a sort of scab over most of his body, so at least he was not leaking blood anymore. At some point, the imprint of a lotus became visible on the scab on his back, but neither Lex nor the lotus paid any mind to the whole process. Lex had lost track of time, but eventually, the process was completed. Halfway through his bond-forming process, Lex realized that his mark was forming in the shape of a key. That only made sense, considering how significant the golden key was to the inn, but Lex was not satisfied with that. Although he ran things at the inn, it was given to him by the system and not something he developed on his own. He did not want his dependence on it to be too strong. As such, he consciously changed the shape of the mark. It now looked like the outline of a person sitting cross-legged atop a dragon. The moment the bond was finally formed, he felt a connection established to the ring, and he became aware of it much in the way he was aware of the inn while wearing the host attire. In fact, the connection was actually completely identical. He stared at the wooden ring and wondered what its original purpose was. Had it been a system at one point? Regardless of whether it was a system or not no longer mattered, for it definitely was not one now. All it could do at the moment was function, barely, as a container for the treasure spirit residing inside. As the spirit was much stronger than the treasure itself, the strain on the ring prevented it from actually performing any function. Fortunately, little Pelvalen could automatically absorb things to strengthen the ring, as long as they were suitable. Little Pel, how do you feel? Over the past, however long it took to bond the ring, little Pel would constantly speak to Lex and motivate him and keep him entertained. As such, Lex felt a little closer to the spirit, though he retained an appropriate amount of caution in dealing with it. Even now, he did not trust it completely. Much better, the squeaky voice replied. It's as if now that there's a connection between us, my body has more energy to support itself now. That's good, that's good. Little Pel, I've spent a lot of time on bonding the ring, so now I have a few other things to do. But first I want to ask you about a couple of things. Do you have access to all of your memories from your past life, or only some of them? No, I barely remember anything. All those memories would be too much for me right now. But if I see something, it will trigger the associated memory, and it will be like I have known about it this entire time. If I try to remember that memory on my own, though, I'll fail. Alright then. In that case, I'm going to project an image to you. Tell me if you recognize it. It's a sword you had in your previous life. Without further ado, Lex sent a picture of the shattered sword to the ring, hoping that it would recognize it, and he was in luck. The ring responded immediately. Oh yes, the Sword of Azel. It's a part of a sword and shield set. That was a normal, iron sword that, in my previous life, I dipped in the blood of a living deity. I wanted to see what happened. The sword and shield both became holy artifacts of the deity's religion, gaining great power. But then later, after I ate the deity, they both lost much of their power. All they have now is a mere aura of their former glory. Lex resisted the urge to twitch his lips. The dragon casually ate a deity after using its blood? Or were there other steps involved? Either case, he was glad he didn't need to deal with a living dragon. After all, he was sure of Pelvalin's personality now, and it was extremely timid and submissive. He could not imagine what would have happened if the ring had retained the full soul of the dragon. Well, the thing is, the sword broke when I was using it, and that aura was absorbed by my body and won't leave it. He projected an image of the sword hiding within his soul, and did his best to convey the feeling it gave off at the same time. Do you know of any way to get rid of it? I suspect it's influencing me a little bit. Oh, it would make sense if there was some influence by its aura on you. After all, it was dipped in the blood of the deity of tribal warfare. He was a very angry and aggressive fellow, but not too smart. Getting rid of it should be pretty easy. All you need to do is master a sword intent and have it absorb that sword aura. Be careful not to feed the aura with your sword intent instead, as that will only make the aura grow more powerful. If you get a chance, absorb the shield aura as well. That was dipped in the blood of the deity of indomitability. Likewise, all you'll need to do is develop a shield intent and have it absorb the aura. It shouldn't be too hard. Yeah, sounds easy, said Lex, though Pelvalin was too young to comprehend the sarcasm in his voice. How easy was it really to develop an intent that could rival that of a deity? While Lex was worrying about how to resolve this situation, he remained unaware that he had become an overnight sensation not in just a single galaxy, but throughout the known realm. In the history of the Origin realm, Lex became the first being to climb atop a living dragon and cultivate on its forehead, and there was a recording to prove it. The recording had spread throughout the realm, and over 100 dragons realm-wide had put out a bounty on Lex William. Though, oddly enough, the bounty would only be honored if Lex was brought in alive. Fortunately enough, the dragons had not targeted the human race in their anger, though no one understood their motives at all, nor did they care. Everyone's focus was on Lex the Dragon Tamer, and finding out his origins. Chapter 786 Reactions I. William Sephor, the founder of the Williams family, was sitting with his legs folded behind him in the middle of a complicated formation. Incense sticks slowly wafted out smoke as the glowing ember on the tip slowly traveled down, leaving a trail of ash. Items containing immense power were placed on the borders of the formation at a fixed interval, waiting to be utilized. 999 Earth Immortals were softly chanting in the distance, feeding their focused energy into a single white rose that was planted in an urn full of soil. The ground beneath them rumbled, as if the planet itself was coordinating with the ritual about to take place. Yet instead of mentally preparing himself to be finally rid of that which was sealed within him, William was looking at a recording of a young human sitting atop a dragon. William had long known about Lex, not in the least because of his friend Larry, who had confused William for Lex once. He then looked into the family and had long known that there was definitely something off about this group of descendants of his. But up until recently it was not worth more than a moment's thought for him. The elder sister, Belle, had a very bad attitude and wanted to become the family head, but at least she was extremely competent. In fact, the very ritual he was about to partake in was a result of her actions. Then there was her mysterious father, who put inscriptions inside her body that could literally draw blood from a celestial-level cultivator. Just that act alone meant that he had the strength to kill William. It was no joke. How could someone achieve such a level of strength so silently? How had he remained undetected for so long? But now, topping all of them, was this Lex who climbed the face of a living dragon. "So, another one of your descendants?" asked Batitogolder, looking at his brother weirdly. "Do you need to ask?" William asked, annoyed. "But you cannot tell through divination or anything else." In fact, his name on the family book was also erased. Someone has gone through a lot of effort to hide Lex. My guess is his father. "How do you think he forced the dragon to sit still?" asked Batu, completely ignoring everything else he said. "Do you know who that is?" William asked, his voice sounding a little forced. "That's Pelvalin Bahotnagorgon, the patriarch of the Bahotnagorgon line of dragons. Whatever is going on in that video, I doubt Lex had any hand in forcing it still. Most likely, he just encountered the dragon as such and took advantage of the opportunity. It's not cool to be jealous of your own descendant, William. Stop trying to diminish his achievement. That's not what I dash." "Do you think he's married?" Jotun asked, disregarding William's complaints. "Jotun, you're related to him, your daughter cannot marry him. Stop trying to collect sons-in-law. They're over 1,000 generations apart." "I think by now the blood relation hardly counts," Jotun said as he looked at Lex sitting atop the dragon. "On second thought, I doubt someone like that is single. He reminds me of my youth." "Even you've never sat on a dragon?" The brothers continued to bicker amongst themselves, but the one thing that remained constant was that their focus remained on Lex. In fact, they had even summoned Damien, Lex's grandfather. Once the ritual was over, they were going to start looking into Lex and his family a little more thoroughly. Elsewhere in the Origin realm, a devastatingly beautiful, yet mature-looking woman studied Lex's reflection. She was Zuriadissa, the clover that had evolved into one of the strongest beings in the realm. Since she had a clone inside the inn, she recognized Lex immediately. A flash of interest passed through her cleaning eyes. Somewhere else, Loretta, the daughter of Balaam, was reading up on Lex. A number of her subordinates had seen him at the Midnight Inn. He was a good candidate to involve in their plans. Giselle, who was boarding a plane off of X-142 after teleporting there from the inn, could not help but think of Lex. She had not revealed any information about him to anyone, and honestly never thought she would ever even see him again. Who even knew if he had even made it off Polbitvi in time? But no matter what, she did not expect to see him so soon, and in such a spectacular fashion. It was good to know he was alive, but she was not enamored by his achievement. Her thoughts always focused on the trials before her. They were not few, and they were not easy. For the briefest of moments, she wondered if her task would be somewhat easier if Lex was there to help her. But the thought came and went, like a leaf in the wind. Belle, Lex's dominating older sister, watched his recording for the 100th time in silence. She had been rewarded heavily by the Tao Lord since in forcefully having her use her bloodline power, he injured her greatly. She had felt a small bit of pride at that, though her character would not allow her to dwell on such a thing for too long. But when she saw Lex's recording, a part of her brain froze. Did someone like that even need protection from the William family? Or were the ones he was being hidden from the William family to begin with? What part of Lex looked like he needed protection? Her little brother had grown up in a castle situated on the tip of a white cliff, surrounded by a flowing river that eventually turned into a waterfall. A noble figure was lazing in her royal chamber. While randomly scrolling through the portal, she suddenly saw a figure she recognized and was startled. Big Brother Lex? With genuine surprise and shock, Moon watched her brother's video. She hadn't seen anyone from her family in many years now. Chapter 786 Reactions I. William Sephor, the founder of the Williams family, was sitting with his legs folded behind him in the middle of a complicated formation. Incense sticks slowly wafted out smoke as the glowing ember on the tip slowly traveled down, leaving a trail of ash. Items containing immense power were placed on the borders of the formation at a fixed interval, waiting to be utilized. 999 Earth immortals were softly chanting in the distance, feeding their focused energy into a single white rose that was planted in an urn full of soil. The ground beneath them rumbled, as if the planet itself was coordinating with the ritual about to take place. Yet instead of mentally preparing himself to be finally rid of that which was sealed within him, William was looking at a recording of a young human sitting atop a dragon. William had long known about Lex, not in the least because of his friend Larry, who had confused William for Lex once. He then looked into the family and had long known that there was definitely something off about this group of descendants of his. But up until recently it was not worth more than a moment's thought for him. The elder sister, Belle, had a very bad attitude and wanted to become the family head, but at least she was extremely competent. In fact, the very ritual he was about to partake in was a result of her actions. Then there was her mysterious father, who put inscriptions inside her body that could literally draw blood from a celestial-level cultivator. Just that act alone meant that he had the strength to kill William. It was no joke. How could someone achieve such a level of strength so silently? How had he remained undetected for so long? But now, topping all of them, was this Lex who climbed the face of a living dragon. "So, another one of your descendants?" asked Bata Togolder, looking at his brother weirdly. "Do you need to ask?" William asked, annoyed. "But you cannot tell through divination or anything else." In fact, his name on the family book was also erased. Someone has gone through a lot of effort to hide Lex. My guess is his father. "How do you think he forced the dragon to sit still?" asked Batu, completely ignoring everything else he said. "Do you know who that is?" William asked, his voice sounding a little forced. "That's Pelvalin Uar Bahatnagorjan, the patriarch of the Bahatnagorjan line of dragons. Whatever is going on in that video, I doubt Lex had any hand in forcing it still. Most likely, he just encountered the dragon as such and took advantage of the opportunity. It's not cool to be jealous of your own descendant, William. Stop trying to diminish his achievement. That's not what I dash. Do you think he's married?" Jotun asked, disregarding William's complaints. "Jotun, you're related to him, your daughter cannot marry him. Stop trying to collect sons-in-law. They're over 1,000 generations apart." "I think by now the blood relation hardly counts," Jotun said as he looked at Lex sitting atop the dragon. "On second thought, I doubt someone like that is single. He reminds me of my youth." "Even you've never sat on a dragon?" The brothers continued to bicker amongst themselves, but the one thing that remained constant was that their focus remained on Lex. In fact, they had even summoned Damien, Lex's grandfather. Once the ritual was over, they were going to start looking into Lex and his family a little more thoroughly. Elsewhere in the Origin realm, a devastatingly beautiful, yet mature-looking woman studied Lex's reflection. She was Zuriadissa, the clover that had evolved into one of the strongest beings in the realm. Since she had a clone inside the inn, she recognized Lex immediately. A flash of interest passed through her cleaning eyes. Somewhere else, Loretta, the daughter of Balaam, was reading up on Lex. A number of her subordinates had seen him at the Midnight Inn. He was a good candidate to involve in their plans. Giselle, who was boarding a plane off of X-142 after teleporting there from the inn, could not help but think of Lex. She had not revealed any information about him to anyone, and honestly never thought she would ever even see him again. Who even knew if he had even made it off Polbitvi in time? But no matter what, she did not expect to see him so soon, and in such a spectacular fashion. It was good to know he was alive, but she was not enamored by his achievement. Her thoughts always focused on the trials before her. They were not few, and they were not easy. For the briefest of moments, she wondered if her task would be somewhat easier if Lex was there to help her. But the thought came and went, like a leaf in the wind. Belle, Lex's dominating older sister, watched his recording for the 100th time in silence. She had been rewarded heavily by the Tao Lord since in forcefully having her use her bloodline power, he injured her greatly. She had felt a small bit of pride at that, though her character would not allow her to dwell on such a thing for too long. But when she saw Lex's recording, a part of her brain froze. Did someone like that even need protection from the William family? Or were the ones he was being hidden from the William family to begin with? What part of Lex looked like he needed protection? Her little brother had grown up in a castle situated on the tip of a white cliff, surrounded by a flowing river that eventually turned into a waterfall. A noble figure was lazing in her royal chamber. While randomly scrolling through the portal, she suddenly saw a figure she recognized and was startled. Big Brother Lex? With genuine surprise and shock, Moon watched her brother's video. She hadn't seen anyone from her family in many years now. Chapter 787 Reactions 2. On another planet, in another galaxy, Liz watched in frustration as her brother climbed the dragon's head. She was supposed to be the beast tamer, so why was she stuck with nothing but sloths while Lex conquered dragons? This was too annoying. It was also supremely cool. Inside the inheritance tower that had been discovered in a minor realm within the Midnight Inn, Alexander fell to his knees after finally defeating his enemy. He had just crossed the 50th floor, and his body was beaten and bruised. His spirit energy was running low, the fatigue was making his reactions slow, and he felt a little dizzy. But, eventually, he stood back up and ate a recovery pill. He would not quit here. He would rest and recover right here, and then he would keep climbing. No matter how high up he climbed, the recording of Lex flashed in his mind, making him feel like he was not trying hard enough. He was not used to being second to anyone, and he was not about to get used to the feeling either. Marlowe, who was laying on a medical bed, burst into laughter when he watched the video, startling his attendants and family members. All of them had been incredibly depressed since the war with the AI ended. Originally that should have been a good thing. But the reason why they were depressed is because the war ended not because of them, but because of the discovery of some unknown planets outside the orbit of Pluto. Some powerful entities had intervened and ended the war, as well as evicted all the Earthlings. They were forcefully being relocated. Although they were assured that their new planet would be a good one and they would be given many allowances to restart their lives, many were wondering what all their previous efforts were for. After all, in the end, they still lost their home. Even Marlowe had been affected by the situation. When they rushed in, they found Marlowe watching Lex's recording. Look at that. You know who that little pipsqueak is? He's my student. While I was losing a war, he was conquering the stars. Damn it if I'm going to be left behind. Someone call Raphael, he needs to watch this too. In the Midnight Inn, Larry was sitting with Irene, his Nico girlfriend, and a few other girls. I'm telling you, Lex is an old friend of mine. He's a solid guy, very reliable. I'll introduce you ladies to him sometime. Be sure to make the most of the opportunity, it won't come again. Another group, also inside the inn, was also discussing Lex. I tell you, no matter how much I try to divine his destiny, I just can't do it. He must have some kind of treasure that protects him from divination. The man complaining was a noble diviner, and the head apprentice of the Neom Empire's Grand Diviner. The Neom Empire spanned an entire realm that, although not as big as the Origin realm, had already completely matured. That meant the realm could give birth to Dao Lords, and anyone who held the title of Grand Diviner of such an empire was surely a Dao Lord as well. As such an entity's apprentice, the man's competency and capability could not be questioned. He was just one of many who had come to the inn to participate in the upcoming event specifically targeting oracles, diviners, prophets, and the like. The man just became enemies with every dragon in the realm. Do you think he would be foolish enough to try such a thing if he didn't even have such simple protective measures? Asked Vera, who was sitting nearby. I don't even need divination to guess something like that. Even if I can't divine him, I should be able to look into the dragon, right? But I can't. In fact, I even felt a sense of foreboding while trying to look into him, as if discovering the truth would put me in danger. Just because you have an official exemption from universal mandate that allows you to look into such things without suffering any heavenly punishments, it does not mean you keep bragging about wasting your time divining things we should steer clear of. The man smirked as if he was proud of the fact that he was caught, not ashamed of his intentions being detected. Ragnar, who was taking a break for his meditations, looked on with approval as he saw Lex as a symbol for the rise of the human race. Once Ragnar solved the mystery of the curse plaguing him, and prevented himself from turning into a demon, he would keep an eye out for this kid. He was worthy of nurturing. Somewhere deep inside of the cosmic cloud, the Midnight Battalion was being sent even deeper than before to even more unstable planets. Their relocation this time was taking longer than usual, which allowed them to relax and scroll through the local network. Although they were not connected to the main Hanali portal, someone had shared Lex's recording here as well. After all, it was the hottest topic in the entire realm. "Hey, I've seen that guy at the inn," someone said, and showed the video to Z. For some unknown reason, Z felt like Lex looked very distasteful, as if he was an unreliable boss who would leave all the work to his manager and go off on vacation. Z was surprised at the completely random thought, before he began paying attention to the video some more. Regardless of how Lex looked, the video was still interesting. Somewhere, far, far away from the known realm, a golden dragon stared at the recording of Lex climbing Pelvalen. It was unknown how the recording reached so far from outside the portal's reach. The golden dragon growled, his beautiful golden scales glowing very briefly, but then the dragon closed his eyes. It was not time yet, but when it left, he would look for this Lex William personally. Chapter 788 Intent. Lex spent a little more time talking to little Pel to familiarize himself with the ring, and establish a deeper bond. The more he talked to him, the more he realized that Pel wasn't really capable of complicated thoughts at the moment. Although he had access to a number of the dragon's memories, his inability to form complex thoughts was most likely what protected him from being influenced by the dragon's past. For now, his entire world was simple. Since he liked, and somewhat feared, Lex, he would try his best to flatter him. At the same time, Pel would do his best to absorb materials to strengthen himself. But he was not greedy for materials, and he would not get upset when he was deprived of them either, as was evident from the fact that Lex did not let Pel have his skin. Speaking of which, Lex tried to destroy his skin, but it was easier said than done. It retained his incredible defense even in its removed state. He put it away and made a mental note to destroy it later on, lest any complications arise. He also planned a little how to overcome the sword aura inside his soul. He could more or less determine that his overly aggressive behavior was influenced by that aura directly. He was already familiar with intents, such as sword and shield intent, as he had covered the topic while studying at the academy. Just to be sure that the information he had was correct, however, he asked Pel to elaborate on what intents were, as if he were testing Pel's knowledge instead of learning from him. "According to my memories from my past life, intent can be explained from two different points of view, a basic one and an advanced one. A basic point of view was that intent of any kind was a manifestation of his mastery over anything brought about by spiritual energy. To manifest it, one would first need to achieve a certain level of competency in the respective field, after which one's state of mind and comprehension in the respective field would cause a resonance with the internal and ambient spiritual energy, giving birth to intent. The internal spiritual energy can be used to store that intent within one's body, while the ambient spiritual energy can be used to give birth to intent when the respective field is being applied. The most powerful form of intent is when internal and external are combined together. An example of this can be something mundane, such as art or music. One would need to first reach a level in which they can be considered a master, to even reach the threshold to begin to manifest intent. That does not mean that, for example, the art or music needs to be good, but rather its effects have to be in line with the intention of the master. For example, if the intention of the master artist is to arouse disgust, he can purposefully create a horrendous piece of work. Similarly, a musician can use music to either enlighten, invigorate, or even agitate the listener. As long as the work reflects the intention of the master, good or bad does not matter. Once such a level is reached, they have reached the minimum threshold to manifest intent. Since intent is formed using spiritual energy, and can be formed from internal or external energy, the higher the cultivation level, the easier it is to manifest a basic level of intent. This is because internal intent is always easier to form. For example, someone at the chi training level will not have enough spiritual energy to manifest intent, so they will have to rely solely on external spiritual energy to manifest it. As such, if someone at the chi training manages to do so, they can be considered a genius in that field regardless of where they are. But the reverse is also true. If someone only manages to manifest basic intent at the golden core level, where their internal spiritual energy is extremely concentrated, then they will be considered the epitome of trash in that field. After all, in the golden core level, even a bit of effort will result in the manifestation of basic intent. But at that point, the effects and benefits brought about by a basic intent are negligible to their existing power level. They would need a higher level of intent for the benefits to be applicable on their power scale. An example of this is how a basic, normal arrow can easily kill a mortal animal in a single blow, but is actually worse than useless when the opponent is a dragon. A stronger arrow would be required to face a dragon, preferably one that is imbued with various powers and enchantments. Little Pell paused in its explanation, as if it felt like it had said something inappropriate, but could not realize why. As such, it continued with its explanation. The more advanced explanation for intents comes into effect from a point of view from a nascent cultivator and onwards. This is because the nature of intent, and even cultivation, changes from that level. Ultimately, it has to do with laws. All intents are actually manifestations of laws, formed by a resonance in the user's intention and comprehension in a certain field with that of the actual laws associated with that field. In fact, on a higher level, it changes even from just being resonance, and enters a new level, which is called Tao. For some reason, I cannot recall the associated memories too clearly, even though I can clearly remember having reached such a level myself in my past life. That's more than enough, said Lex, who was very satisfied with the answer. In summary, he would have to learn sword intent, and then level it up to the point where he could absorb the aura within his body. Fortunately, he already had a perfect teacher in mind to help him get started on this journey. Moreover, with his enhanced comprehension and observation due to his new cultivation technique, he did not fear that he would fail. If anything, he was already considering what kind of sword he would choose to master. But all of that could wait. There were a few things that were more important at the moment. One, for example, was healing and recovering his skin. He did not want to start practicing sword work while looking like a diagram from a medical book. The second important thing that required his attention first was to finally explore his loot. The best part was, with Pell as his guide, he would not need to go around guessing what each and every item was. He could get a detailed explanation for each item right from the source. But his meditation room was not a suitable place for such a thing. In his apartment, Lex had long established a kind of storeroom where he placed all the numerous items he collected or earned through various adventures. It was time now to turn it from a mere storeroom to a vault. Or, better yet, since he did not expect anyone to really rob from him within the inn, he would create a museum of all his hard-collected loot. No, not loot, he meant his hard-earned rewards. Feeling quite grand at the moment, he decided to style his museum after the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He entered the design interface and added a heavily decorated wooden double door in his apartment, which opened up to a massive space where a building that looked identical to the Met stood. Considering the amount of space he was adding, it would be very inappropriate to continue calling his place within the inn as his apartment. Henceforth, owing to his recent upgrade, he would refer to it as his penthouse. After all, it was not ridiculous for a penthouse to have a little something in the back, right? Just because the little something at the back of his penthouse was 2.2 million square feet total, did not mean it couldn't qualify. Putting these minor details aside, he teleported his already existing stock inside, but found that a majority of the building remained empty. How embarrassing. As if to address the issue, he entered what would be one of his main exhibits, and removed the massive 30 feet, 9.1 meters, rainbow jewel alongside the pillow and pedestal it was placed on, and admired it. He could still feel the dragon's obsession that plagued this jewel, but owing to the fact that he was inside the inn, was completely immune to it. The obsession on it was now no more than an accessory, enhancing the worth of the jewel from an artistic point of view. Say Pell, you wouldn't happen to recognize this jewel from your past life's memories, would you? Yes, I do. Pell answered excitedly. That jewel contains the corpse of a primordial. Chapter 789 Questions. Lex had heard the term primordial before. In fact, let alone a corpse, he had even met a living primordial, technically. The lotus on his back was actually called a world seed lotus, and its species was called the primordial origin lotus series. Lex did not know much about this species, but based on the name he could easily guess that the lotus on his back was just one of many primordial lotus. Moreover, the lotus required extremely special spiritual energy called primordial spirit energy, which would be present in the yin unless he raised the star level of the yin to 8. That was the original reason why he had to carry the lotus on his back, as it could only absorb that energy from the universe at large outside the yin. He did not know how abundant that energy was in the universe, but at least it surpassed what was present in the yin. He had also heard the term elsewhere as well. To be specific, the realm which one would ascend to after achieving heavenly immortal from inside the crystal realm was called the primordial garden. He did not know much about it except that the crystal race maintained a presence there, but could not be considered as a dominant race there. The most recent mention of the term primordial was by the strange creature that could enter Lex's mind. Although its words were not too reliable, it had claimed that whatever had killed the dragon was a sleeping primordial being. The chances of a sleeping primordial being waking up so close to a primordial being's corpse were uncanny, so Lex scanned the jewel and corpse, but the system did not detect any living being inside which could be a guest. That relieved him. All in all, it was not a term he had not come in contact with before. He was able to surmise that it represented something significantly powerful, as was evident from the level of the primordial garden as well as the lotus on his back, but should not be so rare, right? If that was the case, he could not understand the level of excitement in Pell's voice, nor why such a thing would be deserving of a dragon's obsession. Lex had conveniently forgotten that the lotus came from a seed that could be considered rare not just in the origin realm, but in the entire universe. What's so special about a primordial's corpse? Lex asked. With Pell, even though he mostly maintained a state where it looked like he was testing Pell instead of asking him, he was not too worried about his act being detected. For one, Pell was too simple-minded at the moment. Secondly, he did not meet Pell with the identity of the Innkeeper, so he did not have an overwhelming need to maintain any kind of reputation. After all, it was perfectly normal if Lex, as a golden core cultivator, did not know all the secrets of the universe. My memories about primordials are blurry again, just as they were about matters of the Tao. But what I can recall is that primordials were the first beings to be born in the universe. To be clear, I am not talking about mythical beings, who are the first to be born in a newborn realm. I am directly referring to the first ever beings born in the entire universe. As for how many there are, how powerful they are, what is the relevance of finding such a corpse? I cannot recall. If I try to force it, I feel the pressure on my body increasing, as if it's about to break. Pell sounded incredibly anxious, as if to prove to Lex that it was trying its best, but was limited by its breaking vessel. It continued, as for what the corpse can be used for, the list is endless. Let alone, the corpse, just the jewel it is trapped in is endlessly valuable. According to my memories, in my previous life I should have hypothesized that this jewel was actually extremely ancient amber that had been converted into this form due to its exposure to the primordial. This amber is endlessly valuable, as even a single grain of it can immensely help immortals solidify their tenets and help them study laws. It can also be used to create miraculous medicine, be used in forging weapons, be used to aid in spiritual and body cultivation, be used to cure poison, and many more uses. All in all, just the jewel itself is endlessly valuable. In my previous life, I attached a great deal of hope for a breakthrough to my next realm on this jewel, although I cannot remember how. As for the corpse, that is too terrifying a thing to easily deal with. Even in my previous life I did not dare easily conduct tests on it, and only studied it from afar. The corpse has essentially fossilized, so there is no hope to possess it. But I recall theorizing that the fossil is an incredibly potent source of chaos energy, so much so that even in my previous life I did not dare remove it from the jewel. However, I also suspected that the fossil can be used to further refine my own bloodline, and possibly elevate my bloodline purity to the level of a mythical being. There were many other theories as well, but due to the associated danger, I never got around to testing them. The only thing I can confirm is that the corpse, or fossil, is extremely valuable, but to actually derive any value from it, one must first be sufficiently powerful. Otherwise, instead of being valuable, the body will be a great source of danger. Considering that the dragon had died under the most unusual of circumstances, Lex did not take Pel's warning lightly. Despite having the inn, and all the benefits the system afforded him, he decided to leave the corpse within the jewel for now. Say Pel, what was your cultivation level in your previous life? Lex asked, unable to hold back his curiosity. I was in the heavenly immortal realm, Pel said simply, without any hint of pride or achievement. Oh, responded Lex, as if he had heard about something as common and mundane as the weather. More and more, Lex was feeling incredibly lucky that he ended up getting Pel, as it might be his greatest gain yet. So far, he had been more or less stumbling his way through the cultivation world, trying to get answers where he could. Now he finally had someone he could ask questions to without fear of getting judged or any repercussions. Lex decided to continue bringing his loot out and fill up his museum. The next thing was naturally the Peronian jade. The black jade tree looked both insidiously haunting and spectacularly beautiful at the same time. Although this addition was destined to be short, he wanted to acknowledge it. Moreover, he was also curious about its purpose. What is this, Pel? Peronian jade, he replied fanatically. In my previous life, this was my greatest treasure until I found the primordial corpse. This kind of jade is filled with a very powerful destructive force. I can't remember what I used it for, but I vaguely recall it had something to do with cultivation. The destructive force inside this jade was unique, and cannot be replicated by any other being. It can have various uses. The answer was simple, and not mired in secrecy and history as the corpse, but at the same time it could not be underestimated. Any item that could be used by a heavenly immortal for cultivation, especially a dragon, was not ordinary at all. This was especially since Pel had even considered it his most valuable treasure at one point. Where can I find more of it? Do you have any ideas? Peronian jade is very rare, and can only be found on planets that are at least 5 stars in rating. But not every 5-star planet will have some, and even if it is found, it is not easy to harvest. The jade in my old collection has already been wiped of all life, but any fresh jade you might find in the wild will most likely contain its own spirit. Fighting it off is a perilous task even for dragons. In the entire Origin realm, there is not a single existing Peronian jade harvesting facility, as all known sources of the jade have already been exhausted. You either have to find new, undiscovered 5-star planets or loot someone's vault to get your hands on it. Well, Lex had already done the latter, but he was not in any particular need of it any time soon, so this matter could be put on hold. The next thing he removed was the pool of blood he had collected, as well as the scale. What about these? What are they? He asked, his voice imperceptibly more solemn than before. Chapter 790 Fear. This is heart's blood. To be more specific, this is some blood that should have been refined using a single drop of blood from my heart, while the rest is ordinary blood from my body. This kind of blood is used to nurture the body of a newborn dragon, and help it quickly overcome its initial period of weakness. It's strange, even though I recognize this pool, I have no memories of it at all, or why I would have had one in my previous life. It's almost as if I myself removed the associated memories. What about the scale? Lex asked, his voice extremely level. He wanted to understand why Mary was so interested in it. Although he believed her when she said that it was for building herself a new body, he also wanted to better understand what was so special about the scale. After all, she said that the body she arranged for herself would be different from the one the system arranged for her, but could not elaborate on why. Every time a dragon breaks through a major realm, all their scales molt before they regrow new scales. This particular scale is the so-called reverse scale that covers the heart of a dragon. It is the strongest, most durable scale on a dragon's body and can be used for a multitude of things. It is also the best food for a young dragon to eat, as it strengthens its body and purifies its bloodline further. Lex thought about it for a moment, but did not discover anything too special or unexpected about the scale. It made sense that the hardest scale on a dragon would be excellent material for crafting. Lex had many more questions for Pell, but he only had 2 questions that were most urgent. The remaining questions could wait. As he continued to take out his loot, such as the entire small library that the dragon maintained, or his kitchen and its materials, Lex asked Pell a rather important question. Pell, how urgently do you need materials to strengthen your body? Is it on the verge of breaking? Can it survive taking a hit? He had quite a few materials on hand which could be used to help the ring, and if even something as low-leveled as his own skin could help the ring, then he did not doubt that these other materials could help as well. But, if possible, Lex wanted to keep Pell in a wounded state as long as possible. He did not want to risk Pell gaining higher intelligence as his body recovered, as he was still too useful to Lex. Now that you have bonded the ring, the pressure on me has reduced drastically, so I can survive much longer. But my body is still extremely weak. If I sustain any immortal-level attacks, it will rapidly destabilize my body further, and may cause it to break entirely. Try and see if any of these will help you restore your body, Lex said, and brought out a number of different ores he collected from Pell's own previous collection. The ring softly vibrated and absorbed each of the ores without any problem, but the small crack on the ring was not reduced. They're useful a little bit, but I'll need a lot of them if I want to heal completely. If you have higher quality materials, or materials related to wood, then the healing process will be quicker. Pell, can you hide your aura completely? I don't want to risk people discovering you inside the ring. Until the crack is fixed, it's impossible to completely hide my aura, as some of it will continuously leak. But I can easily disguise myself as an ordinary spirit treasure. No one will suspect anything else, he. Pell laughed mischievously, as if he were a little kid who thought of something naughty. Lex smiled a little, but did not dwell on it for long. There were both risks and benefits to keeping the ring damaged. But the crux of the matter was that he himself was weak. If he grew his cultivation level, then he would not fear the ring healing completely. Yet at the same time he understood that it was not so easy to continue to break through. Lex did not doubt for even a moment his ability to enter the higher levels, but just realized that his progress so far had been stupendously quick and could not expect such a speed to continue. He would have to take things one step at a time. That same thought also caused him to have a few new ideas on how to run the inn in the future, but that would happen after he established his own realm. For now, things would continue as normal. Besides, in a couple more months the inn would stop accepting new guests anyway, so he did not have to be worried about it. Finally, he moved on to his last question with Pell, one that was incredibly important. Hey Pell, do you happen to remember how you died in your last life? Considering the treasure spirit's chippy attitude, Lex almost expected an equally chippy and quick response, but for once he was answered with silence. In a special room designed to contain spirit energy, Lex had been removing all the items, including the chandelier, that gave off the heated spiritual energy when he paused and looked at the ring. Pell, he asked, once again. I don't remember, Pell finally answered, his voice incredibly low, almost like a whisper. The only thing I recall is fear, a lot of fear. There was also pain. More pain than I ever felt before. Then nothing. Even now, I feel a little scared to think back on it, as if even thinking about it will put me in danger. Alright, forget I ever asked. Don't think about it, said Lex abruptly. He was no longer a novice in the cultivation world, and knew that some mysteries were better left untouched. Chapter 791 Newfound Fame. Lex spent a decent amount of time taking out his loot and setting it up in his new museum. He would then use his room creation feature to alter each room according to the needs of each specific item. For example, he needed a room which would not allow energy to leak for all the items emitting the heated spiritual energy. For the energy sources of all the ships, he needed a room that would block radiation as well as maintain a sterile environment. More than the energy sources, Lex was particularly careful when setting down the various artillery shells he had picked up, as he no longer even had skin to lose. At the same time, he questioned Pell thoroughly over their use, and discovered that most of these were extremely useful against Earth immortals, and he had even picked up one that could be used against Heaven immortals. The power and rarity of these weapons were the reason that Pell had decided to collect them in his previous life. But while they were potent weapons, Lex could not use them easily, for he did not even have the means to leave the blast radius once used. He decided the best use for these would be if his spaceship was equipped with them, but these weapons were not compatible with the Silent Wanderer, and he didn't want to take the massive flying daycare outside of the inn. The only alternative was to get more ships, or find engineers, and start building his own ships. No matter what, this was a project Lex was determined to work on, because it would be a waste to have such powerful weapons, but be unable to use them. At the same time, Pell informed him of various other uses for many of the treasures he already had but did not know what to do with. The knowledge of someone who had lived for millions of years was invaluable, even if Pell could only access a very small percentage of it. Since Lex had no other urgent tasks coming up in the foreseeable future, he decided to spend the next few months cultivating and refining his plans for the future while strengthening his workers with the knowledge that Pell gave him. For now, though, Lex had to address a minor issue that he had been hoping to avoid. His soul pact that he had made with the Infinity Emporium began to weigh on him. He could feel a subtle compulsion to deliver the Peronian jade to them now that he had already collected it, and was not urgently in trouble. There was no real reason to delay delivering it, but he had hoped to at least regrow his skin before he went out again. For a second, he considered rewearing his skin, like a costume, before he discarded the extremely creepy thought. Instead, he just put on his defensive suit, put on a pair of gloves as well as a mask that covered his entire face. He teleported out to X-142, before promptly entering the Emporium. He had been expecting to see Powell waiting for him, and even considered that the Real Powell might be there as well, slightly annoyed over the delay. What he had not been expecting was the nearly worshipping gaze the usual Powell he met gave him, and the amazed look the real Powell, who was also there, gave him. I must say, Mr. Lex, when you told me you were raiding a dragon's horde, I did not expect you to be doing it with the dragon there. I thought you had come across the forgotten cave of a long-deceased dragon, or something along those lines, at least. But your courage and means, please allow me to applaud you. Powell actually clapped, but Lex was taken aback by his words. Could he have been spying on Lex? Was there some surveillance mechanism in one of the treasures he had gotten from the Emporium? How did you know what I did? Asked Lex, the accusation heavily evident in his voice. But his question caught them by surprise. Could it be that you do not know? Mr. Lex, a recording of you climbing the dragon has been spread all over the Henali portal. I dare say you are the most famous human in the entire Origin realm right now. As if to support his words, Powell pulled up the recording that showed Lex struggling under the weight of dragon's might as he approached Palvalin's corpse. Without waiting for Lex to ask further questions, Powell elaborated further. Although for a short time the recorder managed to hide his identity, he did not have the level of protection you have applied against divination. His identity was eventually discovered, and has become an open secret amongst the upper level of the portal. It's a dwarf called Barley Holdenson. Here, let me share the details with you. Powell handed Lex a small black device that he had clearly already prepared. Once connected to the portal, the device would reveal all the information stored onto it, similar to a USB. Lex grabbed the device, but he was struggling to determine how he felt about the situation. He could not accurately conceive what it meant to be the most popular human in the realm, though he guessed the reason his details were hidden was because of the protection of the inn. Now that he was out, he might once again become susceptible to divination. That could potentially put him in danger. I was a little busy recovering from the events, Lex said, as he removed his glove to show Powell his hand. I did not have time to check the portal, or talk to anyone, so I am not sure what happened. Would you mind telling me how this video was received? Powell nodded understandingly. No matter what, it must not have been easy to escape from that situation. The most mysterious thing was that the dragon, who had been identified, had disappeared. Only a very few people knew that Pelvalin had also been spotted inside the Midnight Inn, before promptly disappearing again. Although Powell happened to be one of those people, he did not plan on mentioning it. There were certain things even he did not want to get involved in. But he did not mind sharing the rest with Lex. Chapter 792 Fan Club. Lex was no longer in the front entrance of the Emporium. Instead, he had followed Powell to the back and was now sitting comfortably in what looked like a small guest room. There were very few furnishings, but it was decorated very tastefully. Lex could feel his mind calm down as in his chair, taking a sip of some tea. Another Powell, a butler Powell if you will, served him and Powell. Between the two of them was a projection playing a video, but this time the recording was not of him in the Dragon's Hall. No, this time the recording was from the point of view of the ship that had been repeatedly targeting him back at Phrygia. It went right up until the artillery explosion. The worst part of it was that at each second of the video, there were annotations made thoroughly analyzing Lex, his reaction to the events unfolding and his strengths and weaknesses. This was just one of many such videos that Powell had managed to get his hands on. His strengths and weaknesses had been thoroughly analyzed, and though many mistakes had been made in the analysis, many of them were also correct. Once the video ended, another one began playing immediately. This one was a very short video, taken by a public security camera on Abruptly. Lex only appeared in the video for a moment. Even so, someone had found the video and made annotations on it as well. Mainly, it noted down the time and place of this video and commented on, and questioned how Lex was able to travel all the way from Abruptly to Phrygia in such a short period of time. No recordings of him from any other planets, such as X-142, Vegas Minima or Earth had been discovered yet, but he believed that unless the attention on him dropped significantly, it was only a matter of time before someone realized. From there, it would not take long until someone associated him with the Midnight Inn. Of course, Lex doubted that even the craziest conspiracy theorist would conclude that Lex was the owner of the inn, but connections could be made nonetheless. In fact, now that he was thinking about it, he was sure that a number of irregulars would have already recognized him. If that were the case, the connection would have already been made. Fortunately, he had made preparations in advance, and already linked his identity as Lex to the inn-worker Leo. The connection would not be easily discovered, and only be found if someone were trying to purposefully unveil his secrets. That would cause them to believe that the information they unveiled was legitimate, and not a ruse he had purposefully put in place to hide his actual identity. His identity as the Innkeeper was safe, for now. For now, he had two immediate concerns. The first was the massive number of bounties on his head. He was officially a wanted man. It felt both intimidating and very cool at the same time, especially when considering that all the bounties that had been placed on his head were from various dragons. The second thing he had to worry about was the Lex Williams fan club. Powell had only mentioned it briefly, but it had over 31 billion members already, and those were just the ones who signed up on the portal. Moreover, many of the fans were from various races, and especially a few races who had strong contention against dragons. Alongside details of Barley Holdenson, the device I gave you also records detailed information on all the dragons who have put bounties on you, as well as all the dragons associated with Pelvalin Uar Bahatnagorjan. But even I only have limited information on dragons, so what I gave you is barely more than what is publicly available. Powell made no mention of any remuneration for his efforts, and Lex did not bother mentioning it either. The man was clearly giving him a favor, and Lex needed all the allies he could get at the moment. Thank you, that is quite helpful. Do you have any idea what other kind of trouble I can expect from this? What you have to look out for most are people interested in collecting the bounty on your head, or those who want to rob your gains from the dragon's hoard. These are your greatest threats. The chances of you running into a dragon are minimal at best. True dragons are very rare and they disdain doing things secretly. If a dragon is coming towards you, it will do so openly and publicly. That will give you enough time to run away, or make any other preparations you need. Lex nodded, and collected all the information Powell gave him, before taking out the Peronian jade and handing it over. By the way, I will need the best protection you have against divination, he said, hoping to get his hands on some treasures. This was something he would have to pay close attention to. On Nibiru, the young Tiffany, who had once been saved/kidnapped by Lex, was watching a recording. In it, she saw a very familiar face belonging to the man she had always thought had died protecting her. She could still remember how he ran away while pulling all the attention of the wolves towards himself, while leaving her to hide in a tree. It was his heroic sacrifice that had given her courage throughout her life, and allowed her to pursue the goal of freedom for humans on Nibiru. But suddenly, she discovered that the man was alive. Not only that, he was a mighty dragon tamer. He was the hero that the humans on Nibiru needed. She clenched her fists and decided to immediately go to the Midnight Inn and put up a task to contact him. But before that, she turned her attention to the problem at hand. Surrounding her hideout was a small colony of vermilion bats, coming to assassinate her. They thought she could not sense them, but they did not know that what awaited them was not their target but death. Chapter 793 New Plan. While Lex waited for Powell to bring all the items he had requested, he watched the initial recording of him in front of the dragon. He had to admit that while he himself knew of how much he had suffered, from the back it seemed like Lex was casually strolling. At most, it seemed like Lex was savoring the dragon's might instead of resisting it. Some parts of the recording seemed like they were edited. For example, the video started off with barley mid-sentence. Moreover, while the recording showed Lex climbing the dragon, it cut off right before Lex was about to begin cultivating. Lex narrowed his eyes. At the time his condition was too bad, so he really did not have the awareness, or even the ability to check if someone was spying on him. However, he could clearly tell by the timing of when the recording cut off that whoever had filmed it had clearly seen him meditate. Yet despite that, he had not shown it in the recording. In a way, Lex should be grateful that Barley had not shown it. After all, since the recording even recreated the effects of Dragon's might, then the recording would also show how Lex had been able to absorb a portion of it. If something like that had been revealed, then the scale of things would be far from what they currently were. Lex had reflected on the effects of domination, and long realized how his own aura was able to absorb that of the dragons. While he was sure this was a result of his nameless cultivation technique, that was not exactly something he could publicize. However, if the recording had been released, then the whole realm would have been hunting him down to figure out his secret. While Lex was spared that, there remained a very real possibility that Barley may release the actual recording, or that he may even lose it. The only way to ensure the matter did not get out of hand was to meet Barley personally. But finding him was the main issue. Lex would not mind having a long, deep conversation with the dwarf using his fists. After all, if the dwarf was considerate enough to leave out Lex cultivating atop the dragon, he may as well have not released the recording at all. Or maybe this was just a way for him to get Lex's attention, and in reality, the dwarf wanted to blackmail him. Whatever the case, Lex wanted to meet him. But the problem of finding him was the greatest issue at the moment. Just as he was pondering this particular conundrum, Powell finally entered and brought him the items he had requested. It was a protective treasure that would help him avoid any kind of divination up to a certain standard. A heaven immortal would have to be personally divining information about him for it to even be a possibility to discover something. The best part was that it would latch onto his body like a tattoo, and remain there for a few years after which it would dissipate. Afterwards, he would need to procure another such treasure, if it was available. But that was not an issue for him, and he was just glad that the treasure didn't take the form of another piece of jewelry. He was not exactly used to it. In exchange for the treasure, Lex merely handed over one of the many jewels that emitted heated spiritual energy that he took from Pel's hoard. It was apparently quite valuable, and only formed on planets that dragons actually resided on. What about finding a way to contact Barley? Lex asked. He had asked Powell if the Emporium could set up a meeting between them or locate the dwarf for him. Unfortunately, despite its great reach, the Emporium did not partake in this kind of business. However, he did sell information that could help Lex. I don't need to give you any more information on Barley, you already have it all. Besides that, the only thing you need is this. Powell handed him a business card that was, oddly, completely blank. Although it looked unremarkable, Lex had actually paid a hefty amount for this card. Why do I feel more and more like a villain? Lex wondered as he held the card. Once you return to Swera, pour spirit energy into the card and you will be greeted by one of the attendants for Hicks, the largest operating assassination organization in that galaxy. They have remarkable means to locate your target as long as they are within that galaxy, and you can provide them with sufficient information. This is the best I can offer you at the moment. Once you look at the information I've given you, you will realize that finding that dwarf is harder than it seems. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if he's already been caught by some person or organization who is interested in the particulars of what happened on Phrygra. Speaking of which, here is a fresh ore from a planet within the Swera galaxy, taken away only a few minutes ago. I took care of this matter personally, so you can be assured that there is nothing wrong. Lex nodded, and took everything Powell offered. He had only 2 connections to that galaxy, and one was literally a war zone between Hanali and the Fugan, and another was not really a place he dared to return to at the moment. It was almost as if every planet he stepped on experienced a massive trial. As such, he needed access to a new planet in Swera if he had to go and search for the dwarf. Without spending any more time, Lex exited the Emporium and a few moments later, left the planet. However, mere seconds after he disappeared, an unusual rip seemed to open in space and a skull wearing an ethereal shroud seemed to peek out. Unable to find its target, the skull retreated and the rip closed, unbeknown to all around it. Lex, who had returned to the inn, now had an issue on his hands. He did not want to go to any other planet right now, but at the same time he did not want to waste any time looking for Barley. He had not even recovered his skin, which was a major injury that affected both his spirit and his soul. It was not the best idea to be prancing around on a new planet, especially with his history of getting involved with trouble. But if he waited till his skin healed, it might already be too late, not to mention that the inn was going to cease accepting new guests within a couple of months. That also meant that if he was outside the inn at that time, he would not be able to return. Indecision plagued him, but only for a short time. Even though it went against his original plan, he could not afford to leave this issue unattended. Who knew if it might blow up into something bigger later on? Although he could hide in the inn and just avoid going out, that was no way to live. With his decision made, all he needed to do now was plan on how to increase his odds of success as much as possible. At the same time, he had to avoid getting sucked into any problems. While he had a lot of faith in his own ability to plan for such things, there just happened to be a particular resource inside the inn that he could take perfect advantage of at the moment. Making sure none of his skinless body was exposed, Lex teleported over to Main Street, where a group of kids seemed to be sitting in a nearby park. Among them was someone Lex knew well enough, Vera Joel. She was an oracle, and all the kids surrounding her were also either oracles, prophets, diviners, or something along those lines. They had come here to attend the event Vera had planned. Since that was the case, it would almost be wasteful if Lex didn't try to foresee any upcoming trouble he might encounter. Fortunately, he had not used the treasure Powell had given him yet, so he still had a chance. As he approached the group, before he even had a chance to say anything, Dara looked at him, then looked at one of the other girls in the group. "Leslie, it's your chance to shine. Do a good job with this one, and he can give you exactly what you want." The girl, Leslie, was taken aback by Vera's words, before fixing her gaze onto Lex. She was a human, probably, but had 4 eyes instead of 2. The two, smaller eyes on her forehead, right above her normal eyes, looked like they were blind. Yet, for some odd reason, they fixed their gaze onto Lex's shadow. I can foretell your future, but first you have to pay. Also, the price is non-negotiable. If you can't pay, you get nothing. Chapter 794 Lightning Vessel. Lex smiled. That's why he liked Vera so much, she was extremely direct. It saved him a lot of time. The only concern he had now was if Leslie would be able to accurately predict the future. That depends on what kind of payment you want, Lex stated as he observed the young girl. Besides her 4 eyes, she looked completely normal, though Lex could not decide if that was a good thing or not. After all, the more special she was, the better her chances of predicting his future, right? How much do you know about predicting the future? Not much, I suppose. I don't want you complaining that the price is too high later, so let me tell you a little something. Since the future possibilities are endless, every oracle, diviner, prophet, or basically any profession that deals with looking into the future sets themselves up with extreme restrictions. These restrictions limit the streams of the future they see, thereby increasing their accuracy tremendously. Some like to keep their restrictions private, but others advertise their restrictions as it gets them more clients. I specialize in a very specific kind of foretelling that peers into an alternate reality linked to your shadow. The details are irrelevant, but what matters is that I am extremely sensitive to incoming opportunities or dangers. It sounded like exactly what Lex needed. But the more potent the ability, the higher the cost would be as well, not that he cared about the cost particularly. I'm convinced, but you still need to tell me the price first, said Lex. Even if he didn't care, he couldn't let others know that he had the wealth of a dragon. Leslie looked hesitant, and even turned to look back at Vera, who only nodded encouragingly. Among them all, Vera's ability had the greatest restriction, which is why her predictions were also usually the best. But even then, that did not guarantee 100% the same outcome as the prediction. She looked at Lex with a hint of guilt in her eyes, but it lasted only a moment before her expression became firm. I have 116 sparks left over from a lightning tribulation within my soul. Until and unless they are removed, I cannot do any forecasts. If you want me to help you, you have to remove those sparks first. Lex raised an eyebrow as he looked at Leslie. Why did that not sound so hard? Wait, lightning tribulation? Was Leslie an immortal? She didn't look or feel like one. How did you get sparks of lightning tribulation stuck in your soul? When divining the future, if you look upon something that was meant to remain hidden, then you are punished by the heavens. Do not ask more about this, as this is not a topic that can be easily shared. You may think this price is steep, but I cannot divine anything until those sparks are removed, even if I wanted to. Leslie felt a little bad offering such a high price to whoever this was. She knew how difficult it was to deal with matters of the soul, and then matters related to lightning tribulations. When both of those matters were combined, the difficulty could be imagined. One of the reasons she was attending this meeting to begin with was to find someone who could help her with this issue, as it was a common one among their professions. Sure, I'll do it. Do you want to do it here, or do you want to go somewhere first? Asked Lex, to the surprise of Leslie. Don't you need to prepare? She could not help but ask. Even the others were surprised by how casual Lex sounded. Suddenly, they realized that they may have stumbled upon a great opportunity. No, I can do it now. Besides, I'm in a bit of a rush, said Lex. Although he said he did not need to prepare, he did summon the lightning vessel. The lightning vessel was a small container in the shape of a thunderbolt that could be used to store a single strand of unique lightning. Although it said a single strand, he assumed he could fit multiple sparks inside to form that strand, right? There was only one way to find out. Though, he still had to be careful, for he did not know how dangerous those sparks really were. Alight, we can begin right here. Do you need me to do anything? Stand still, said Lex as he enveloped her with his soul sense and began to locate the sparks. Unlike Lex, whose soul was merged with his body, others usually did not have a soul in a fixed shape until they entered the nascent realm. Leslie was clearly not there yet, for her soul was in the form of an unusual blob that filled her body. Just as she said, there were many sparks inside her soul, with most stuck right at the surface, but a few that reached deeper within. Lex took off his glove and revealed his very raw hand, startling the crowd, but he didn't care about that. He used impervious hands and merged it with his soul sense, allowing it to gain the ability to touch souls. Slowly, and ever so carefully, he reached out and grabbed the spark that was trapped within her soul. Even with the protection of impervious hands, Lex felt his fingers burning as the spark went from zapping her soul to zapping his hand. Even though he was in pain, he could not react abruptly lest he accidentally hurt Leslie's soul instead. Slowly, he pulled out his hand and stored the single spark inside the lightning vessel, which gained a soft glow. He looked at his right hand and saw that a small bit of meat on his index finger and thumb had actually turned to ash. Moreover, around the ash, the remaining meat actually crystallized. How the hell did you survive an entire lightning bolt of that? Lex could not help but ask. How the hell can you grab lightning? Leslie asked back, just as bewildered. How the hell are you alive with so many sparks inside your soul? Lex asked back, as to prove that she was the bigger freak in this situation. Leslie did not answer, nor did Lex focus on the actual answer, either. Instead, he began the process again. This time, knowing what to expect, Lex was slow to approach the spark but quick to retreat, depositing the spark within the vessel. The process was painful, extremely painful at that, but simple otherwise. Around them, all the others stood up and stared in shock as Lex casually achieved what normally took massive and expensive formations that relied on rare treasures. Well, casually was pushing it since it did hurt his fingers somewhat. By the time Lex was pulling out the 50th spark, he had to shift to his left hand because the bone in his right thumb had become visible. But, before he started with his left hand, Lex tried something additional. He used domination as well. He was not familiar with the extent of his ability's utility, and this was a good opportunity to find out. When he actually tried again, unbelievably, the spark was unable to hurt Lex as much as before. Lex was intrigued, the others were awed, and Vera could not help but feel incredibly proud. Since she could only see her own future, naturally helping Leslie would benefit herself sometime in the future. To be more specific, she already knew the identity of this man who had covered his face with a mask. In the future, he would come to her again, and by then their history of having worked well together a few times would already be established. By then, she'd be able to help him find her future husband. Vera almost burst into maniacal laughter as she thought of her plan, but quickly controlled herself. She had to maintain her dignity. Eventually, without any unexpected incidents, Lex took out all the sparks. The lightning vessel, too, was now giving off a bluish-silverish glow, as if it was almost filled to capacity. He planned on using this lightning to help him improve the tribulation room later on. For now, he turned to look at Leslie, who looked completely bewildered. "I believe now it's your turn," said Lex, ignoring the smoke coming out of his hands. So in the end, he still ended up burning both hands, despite impervious hands and domination. Waking up from her reverie, Leslie looked at Lex with great admiration. "Let's go somewhere private." "I never do divinations in public," she said. "I know just the place," Lex said and led her to the Chamber of Secrets. There was literally no place more private within the inn. As soon as they entered and got seated, Leslie began using her powers. Her regular eyes lost color, as if she was blind, and her eyes atop her forehead became black, as if they were reflecting endless darkness. "I see a lot of regret," she said ominously, getting right into the thick of things. Chapter 795 Grave Danger of Dehydration. Of course there was going to be regret, Lex thought to himself. How could there not be an immense amount of regret? In fact, it was surprising that the first thing she saw was regret, and not grave danger. Although Lex was joking, and even poking fun at the usual tarot card readers back in New York who pretended to predict one's future, he took Leslie's words very seriously and listened closely. Leslie, who had not clarified if she identified as an oracle, or a diviner, or whatever else, seemed to tremble as she continued to stare at his shadow. Her otherwise rosy cheeks became incredibly pale, and her aura diminished noticeably. A grave danger is approaching, however the target is not you. Yet at the same time, the target is associated with you. The regret that will plague you is also connected to this approaching danger. There are very few chances to mitigate this danger, and one is already in your possession in the form of a formidable blade. You also. Leslie trembled before she could continue her sentence, and coughed out blood. Her knees had lost strength and she nearly fell to the ground, yet Lex was quick enough to capture her. The woman, who had suddenly become frail, seemed to be in a trance. Her eyes had rolled up and she had lost control of all her body, though for some reason the technique she had been using was still being used. It was as if she was unable to quit, and forced to see things that were harming her. The fatigue that had gripped her radiated from her body to Lex, trying to weaken him. It was also due to this radiation that Lex became aware that while all seemed normal otherwise, Leslie was actually in grave danger. Clouds had formed above her, visible and detectable only to her, and they seemed to be threatening her to stop whatever she was doing. The sensation of being given a warning was very prominent, and seeped from her to even Lex. Yet instead of being intimidated, Lex looked up at the clouds with disdain and anger of his own. He began using domination and threatened the clouds back with a derisive glare. He did not know why these clouds had come and why they were warning her, but they better not interfere in his matters. Fortunately, before the confrontation could continue, Leslie awoke from her trance and ended the technique. "What, who are you?" she managed to mumble weakly, her body trembling as if she had been caught in a blizzard. "It does not matter. You do not need to worry about anything. If there are any repercussions from looking at my future, I'll help you avoid them. You've seen what I can do with the lightning, and that is not the limit of my abilities. If those clouds threaten you again, I can help you bear that danger as well." "No, no need," she said as she stumbled out of his arms and straightened herself. "Those clouds were a warning that I was about to look at things I should not see. It is a form of protection for me, instead of a danger. Although, if I persist in viewing what I should not see, I will be struck by a lightning tribulation. Your future is too messy, and you are involved with too many great entities. Let alone me, or even Vera, even the best oracles will have a tough time accurately predicting your future. In fact, I can confidently say that any future that anyone predicts for you will most definitely be wrong. My prediction is the only exception, and that is because it only predicts opportunities and dangers. The final outcome, or even the sequence of events, is irrelevant. What I can tell you is that there is a danger that is imminent, and the opportunity to escape it is already with you. Besides that, you should try to lay low for a while. Too many great entities are watching you. But that's not a prediction, just my opinion. Alright then, I appreciate your help anyway. You seem to have suffered a bit while using your ability, so have this. It will help you out." Lex took out a small box and handed it to her. The box contained a very small fruit that he had looted from Pel's kitchen, and was one of many he was keeping with himself. For him, due to his unusual physique, the fruit would serve as a source of energy and reinvigoration. For other, normal humans, it would instantly help them recover from weakness and minor injuries, help them improve their physique, remove simple deformities, and filter out impurities. Without waiting for Leslie's response, or giving her an opportunity to reject, Lex teleported away. "Hey Pel, what do you think about Leslie's prediction?" Lex asked as he mused over her words. Although they were vague, he had a suspicion about what they could possibly mean. "If I am not wrong, she should be a mixed-race being, half human and half shadow beast. I do not know what is the origin of her technique, but it is true that shadow beasts are very sensitive to potential dangers and opportunities. In fact, they are so sensitive to it that they can even sense dangers that are thousands of years in the future, and even those that might not just affect them, but their future generations as well. Most do not even know of the existence of shadow beasts, that is how secretive they are. For a mixed breed with shadow beast heritage to appear, her origin must not be simple. If I had to make a bet, I would trust any prediction she made, assuming she inherited that trait of the shadow beasts. Lex nodded. He could not guess what the danger she was speaking of was, but it would either have something to do with the dwarf Barley, or the Innworkers at war. Those were the only two things that could possibly be a source of regret that he could think of at the moment. As for the blade that could help him resolve this threat, Lex also already had a suspicion. He was not prone to collecting or carrying weapons, so there was only one significant blade that he had. That was the single blade of grass he took from Zuriadissa, which carried the laws of regrowth, refinement, healing and a few more minor supporting laws. Since he had collected the various items containing laws, Lex had meant to slowly eat them over time and allow his body to absorb them. Not only would this heal his previously broken cultivation technique, but it would make his body stronger while giving him more affinities. In fact, he really had nibbled on those items once or twice. But for the most part, he had not gotten around to consuming them on a whole. This was mainly because of how busy he was the past few months, and had nothing to do with the explosive diarrhea that accompanied eating such items. But it seemed like he had put this matter off long enough. Even if he could ignore the others, he definitely needed to consume that blade of grass. The associated laws would help him speed up his recovery. Returning to his peak was most likely strongly associated with whatever problem was coming his way. He teleported to his penthouse and summoned the blade of grass. At its very tip there was a small mark where it was evident Lex had nibbled before. Taking in a deep breath, Lex began circulating his technique and took another tiny bite from the blade of grass before teleporting to the restroom. As disgusting as it was, he also took a bottle of water with him. With what he was about to experience, the gravest danger for him was of becoming dehydrated extremely quickly. Even with his new, nameless technique, Lex could not consume too much of such items at a time. After all, despite his many advantages, he was far too weak to handle anything related to laws. Deep in the cosmic cloud that had long become a battlefield, after a very long time, the ship carrying the Midnight Battalion was approaching its next target. Unlike previously, where they fought on rogue planets that contained Fugan forces, this next area looked like a massive floating continent. It looked completely out of place, as if some supreme power had hidden it here where no one could find it. In fact, that was also the opinion of the Henali forces. This time, the battalion was not tasked with an eradication mission, as no living beings had been detected on the continent by the Henali drones which had scanned this place earlier. Instead, they were being sent to thoroughly examine and investigate the space oddity. They were not the only ones with this mission, as countless others were being sent as well. The only thing the battalion and the other forces had in common, however, was that they were all in the Foundation realm. This deep within the cloud, there were some unusual forces at work that made it almost impossible for stronger cultivators to approach without causing an adverse reaction. Z, who was getting ready to land, had a frown on his face. For some reason, he could not use his spatial affinity at all. Chapter 796, Talia. 8 hours later, Lex crawled out of his bathroom, feeling very weak. Why were the laws inside the blade of grass so much more potent than those inside the cosmic elixir? This was not an assumption he made on his own, but the difference he felt in how deeply the laws affected him. He wondered if he would also develop an affinity for the law of growth, or if the law would just exhibit itself in his body. Whatever the case, he would not be able to eat the entire blade anytime soon. It would take a while, possibly even a month. One benefit, besides the alteration of his body, was that Pell was thoroughly impressed by Lex eating laws, and became even more subservient. This was something he could not achieve even in his previous life. While his physical fatigue recovered, Lex ate some food, although he did not touch anything that he collected from the dragon yet. Even if he had a lot of food for now, it was essentially a limited stock, so he was saving it for emergencies. There was one other task he also wanted to do during this time. Although Leslie had predicted a certain danger and opportunity, he did not plan on living entirely according to a few predictions. After all, Leslie herself said it was difficult to predict his future. That task was to begin the hunt for Barley. He did not intend to let this matter go so easily, as some secrets needed to be preserved as long as possible. Making sure that he was covered from head to toe, Lex once again brought the special ticket using the ore that contained the planet's aura. A silver ticket appeared in his hand that he promptly tore, causing a familiar interface to appear before him. Planets available. Planet, Telea. Planet rating, 3.5 star. Planet distance, 399 sectors. Planet environment, dense spiritual energy, rich in resources, moderate climate. Perfect for a beach episode. A beach episode while I have no skin? The only thing that would be perfect for is giving children trauma, thought Lex, before selecting the planet and disappearing. To avoid any problems, Lex was wearing his stealth suit from the get-go, and had no intentions of getting involved in any kind of trouble. Powell had already briefed him on the planet he was about to venture to. Telea belonged to one of the rare neutral organizations in the Origin realm. They would not get involved in anyone else's business, regardless of how evil or good they were, and would stick to themselves. At the same time, they welcome everyone to come and visit their star systems as long as they obey the rules. Since Lex was teleporting to the planet, instead of going through immigration, which was the normal procedure, he would need to immediately report himself to the nearest facilitation center. He did not need to disclose his identity as long as he underwent an inspection that ensured he was not someone who had broken the laws within Telea or an associated territory, so that should not present a problem. Moreover, Powell himself assured him that even if his identity was known, the Telean authority would not be interested in his bounty at all, and he would enjoy the same protection and services as anyone else on the planet. Moreover, Telea was specifically a commerce-oriented planet. It had trade ties with many major powers, and was one of the places where people came to dispose of any merchandise they had that was procured through less than official means. In a way, it was an open black market. This time, Lex really hoped he would manage to avoid trouble. But at the same time, he did not fear encountering a new problem. After all, although every time he got sucked into some unusual problems on each planet he would nearly die, it was quite exhilarating. Moreover, he had confidence in his strength. Even in the face of overwhelmingly strong enemies, Lex had managed to escape and prevail. So, as long as everything went well, Lex intended to treat this like a shopping vacation with a side of slight assassination. If it didn't, well, then Lex would deal with things as they came. When he reappeared, Lex found himself standing on a balcony looking out at a beautiful ocean view. The faint smell of salt in the air welcomed him, alongside the soothing sound of waves crashing against a seawall somewhere nearby. Fresh and vibrant spiritual energy massaged his body, reinvigorating his somewhat tired cells. The melodious sound of birds singing filled the sky, while the soft hum of a busy city hung in the air around Lex. This was by far the best welcome he had on any planet he landed on. Just to be sure nothing was amiss, he turned and looked back. He half expected to find himself having landed right in the middle of a crime scene moments before the authorities came bursting in. Yet nothing like that happened. Behind him were a line of food carts, selling various snacks and foods to the pedestrians. Speaking of whom, just a glance was enough for Lex to see multiple races, many of which he did not recognize. That's when the fancy contact lenses came in handy, which provided him with all the necessary details at a glance. Elves and dwarves seemed to be the most common, but there were beasts, fairies, insects, and other things as well. Lex looked around a couple times, even peering up at the sky as if expecting a meteor to fall down, yet nothing happened. How disappointing, he murmured, before he began strolling. He needed to find a facilitation center and register himself before doing anything else. Telea was a very busy planet, and would likely be very important to him in the future. Through the various facilities available here, Lex could begin linking other nearby planets to the inn as well. That was not to mention how this planet was linked to countless forces, giving him access to so many more possibilities. As such, it was naturally for the best that no problems popped up here. Lex took in the sights as he walked around, amazed at the brilliance of a 3.5-star planet. The spiritual energy was thick, yes, but it also contained a vibrance that was almost exciting to feel. If the energy inside Pel's castle was hot, then the energy here was fresh. Everything seemed to be affected by the energy, and seemed more energetic somehow. The colors of the sky changed subtly with every step he took, and the mood of the pedestrians around him was extremely positive. It was as if everyone here had great mental health just by being here. How was that possible? The technology on this planet was also very interesting to see. Unlike on Earth, where everything was manufactured using various raw materials, on this planet technology seemed to be fused with plants. Instead of screens, items had a kind of crystal embedded in them which would project out holograms, while each piece of technology was powered by their roots which were buried in the ground, through portable batteries which looked more like fruits than cells, or directly through spiritual energy. For some odd reason, even though everything was quite alien, using their technology was quite intuitive. In fact, Lex quickly learned that he could interact with many devices and give commands directly using his spirit sense. Lex did not see any vehicles around, on the ground or in the air, but he was sure there had to be some. Perhaps they were hidden underground. After finding a few road signs, Lex discovered that he was in a small coastal town, which would explain the lack of tall metropolitan buildings. But even this small coastal town was impressive, as Lex could sense powerful auras everywhere he went. Countless buildings seemed to radiate a powerful aura as well, which reminded Lex of what he had learned about high society in the cultivation world. Even the sensation of their energy and aura was something they paid attention to. The buildings were beautiful as well, despite the fact that they seemed to deviate from the theme of using plants. They did not look like they were grown, but instead looked like they were sculpted from various majestic rocks. For all he knew, they might as well be. After an hour or so of walking around, Lex finally found a facilitation center. "Welcome to the Golden Breezer Local Facilitation Center. How may I help you?" asked a young, energetic girl, who his lenses identified as a member of the Blaze race. She had an elven appearance, meaning she looked like a tall human with pointed ears, with the sole exception that her skin looked like it was made of blue fire. "Hi, I teleported over to Talia, so I wanted to have my arrival registered." "Oh? But all teleportations have been sealed?" "How did you get in?" the girl asked, looking genuinely curious. Chapter 797 Hicks. Lex did not answer the question, but only smiled at the lady. Of course, as his face was covered by a mask she could not see the smile, so all she saw was that the man stood there silently without answering the question. "Oh, pardon my curiosity, it is not a required question," the girl said, realizing her mistake. As long as the other person did not break any rules, it did not matter what he did. During the registration process, he would automatically be tested to see if he has broken any rules, so if his arrival was problematic, it would be detected then. Actually, you may not know this since you just arrived, but the heir to the Tylean alliance is to be wed in a few days. It is naturally a grand affair, and has attracted a lot of attention. To prevent overcrowding of the planet from tourists and opportunists, the planet has just entered lockdown. The order was just passed a few hours ago, so it's perfectly natural if you arrived before then. The lady explained. "Please place your hand on the screen," she asked, as he held out a silver screen in front of him. Lex placed his hand on the chilly screen and let it scan him, but kept his attention on the girl. "Will the wedding be screened? Since I'm going to be here for a few days, I might as well watch." "The wedding will naturally be screened, but the first part of the wedding will be open to the public. If you can head over to the capital, Viti, then you can attend as well. Oh, if during your registration you disclose your identity, and your identity is special enough, then you might get an invitation to the wedding as well. Speaking of which, you've signed up for registration. Please walk through the silver door to complete the process." "Thanks," said Lex, before proceeding as instructed. He had only been making idle conversation as he had no real intention to watch any wedding, or get involved in any way. In the following room, there was a single seat with a projection crystal in front of it. As soon as Lex sat down, a number of questions appeared in front of him, awaiting his response. The questions were more facilitation questions than anything else. The first question he got was if he needed any kind of special environment to survive during his visit to Talea. Some examples included being surrounded by toxic or noxious gases, extreme heat or cold, increased or decreased gravity, etc. A number of those could be provided for free, while a few of them required payment. Then he was asked if he wanted to disclose his identity. If he did not, then he would be assigned an anonymous identity, as many things on Talea were linked to identification, such as bank balance, social credit, reservations, etc. He was asked some unusual and unsettling questions, such as if he wanted to create a will for his belongings on Talea. There were certain procedures and forms he needed to fill out if his intention in coming here was to euthanize himself, such as body disposal and preference in burial styles. He was even asked if he had any enemies who he knew were also on the same planet. For the other things the reasoning was beyond Lex's understanding, but by disclosing the identity of your enemies, you would automatically avoid them while on Talea. How that was managed was not disclosed, and Lex could not guess either, but it was basically guaranteed that you would not run into anyone you wanted to avoid as long as you mentioned it first. His impression of Talea changed a bit as he answered the questions, but to his surprise, by the time he finished answering the questions, his registration was complete. If he was investigated in any way, he did not discover it at all. When he stepped out, the Blaze girl was patiently waiting for him. "Welcome to Talea, honored guest. Now that you have registered, there are a few things I need to inform you of. The first thing you should know is that currently your assigned identity has the rank of basic guest. The amenities, services, and privileges you enjoy on Talea are directly related to the rank of your identity. The higher your rank, the better the services. Your identity rank is determined by the bank balance you maintain associated with your identity. If you maintain a basic balance of 1,000 Tylean credits, your rank will be raised from basic guest to honored guest. If your balance is at 10,000 credits, then the rank will be distinguished guest, and so on. There are a few ways in which you can get those credits or maintain the bank balance. The first and simplest is if someone pays you or loans you some credits, they will directly contribute to your balance. Another is to do jobs and complete requests of locals or even the alliance itself. The most common way to accumulate credit is to either transfer it from your original or other anonymous identities you may have in Talea. Or you can sell or mortgage items. The Facilitation Center provides a convenient location if you wish to sell any items. Lex suddenly felt like he was a saint, looking at the final form of a true capitalist. The entire society of Talea seemed to be centered around money, or credit as they called it. "I want to get some credits, and then rent a place to stay. Where can I do that?" "Please follow me," she said, and led Lex to another part of the building that was a lot busier. There were countless counters, yet each of them was dealing with a client. Here you can sell items to get credits, or claim credits from your alternate identities. Do not worry, claiming credit from an alternate identity will not link the two, as the process is done completely anonymously. If you choose to sell an item, then please keep in mind that most items have a fixed price. There is no concept of negotiation in Talea. This works in your favor as well as anyone else's. After ensuring that Lex did not need any more help, the girl led Lex to a counter with a small line and let him be. The experience somewhat reminded Lex of his youth. He used to travel a lot with his family, and at the airport they always used to go to a similar counter to exchange their foreign currency for whatever was used locally. The memories ruined Lex's mood a little, as he did not like to think of his family much these days. But he did not let it bother him, and simply sold some spirit stones. One normal spirit stone was worth 1 Tylean credit. Lex did not have any context for if that was good or bad, but he had countless spirit stones lying about, so he couldn't be bothered to care. After getting 10,000 credits and becoming a distinguished guest, Lex got some help in booking himself a hotel room and then finally exited the facility. He had already asked for directions, so he slowly strolled through the streets, taking in the views as he approached his seaside hotel room. This really did feel like a vacation, which was not something he was complaining about at all. Once he checked into his room, Lex thoroughly inspected it both with his own senses as well as the fancy monocle to ensure there were no spying or recording tools. This was going to be his first time contacting an assassin organization, so he felt a little nervous about getting caught. But he felt more excited than anything. This was so interesting, he never would have imagined himself associating with assassins. Once he was sure that his room was clean, he set up an isolation formation he had bought from the guild room, and then finally took out the card Powell gave him. He channeled his spirit energy into the card, causing it to suddenly catch fire. In an instant, the card turned to ash, falling through the air. But before the ash could reach the ground it shimmered, and then slowly vanished. How mysterious, Lex muttered, enjoying the spectacle. Considering how casual he was feeling, maybe he wasn't nervous after all, just excited. The air rippled in front of him, and a portion of the room seemed to turn black and white. A masked elven figure appeared within the black and white area and looked at Lex. You have used a VIP card to contact Hicks. If your task is accepted, it will be carried out with the utmost urgency and given the highest importance. Please share the details of the mission, and hurry. The reality filter we're using to communicate will not last longer than a minute. Please note that after you share the details, there will be an evaluation period in which Hicks will decide whether to take on the task or not. All payments must also be made in advance in the scenario that the task is accepted. Chapter 798 Invitation. Lex looked at the black and white figure and was quite curious about the effects that followed the man. Was the so-called reality filter what he used to come here? Through his spatial affinity, Lex could clearly tell that the figure was not actually in the room with him. Instead, the black and white filter was projecting his presence from another location here. It was a very safe way of meeting others, which made sense. After all, if assassins openly exposed themselves, then they should only expect to be attacked in return. Before I begin, I must clarify that I don't actually need anyone assassinated. I just need you to locate someone and share the details of their location and circumstances with me in as much detail as you can. Lex was not worried about not being able to communicate his entire message to the correspondent, as conversing with spirit senses was extremely fast, so a minute was more than enough for them to talk at length. That is acceptable, however that will not reduce any charges. You will still be charged as if you are assigning an assassination mission. That is acceptable. The target is a dwarf named Barley Holdenson. His last known location is. Lex shared all the information given to him by Powell, without holding anything back. It had briefly occurred to Lex that he could also ask the assassins to kidnap Barley if they found him, but he would rather not complicate things further. Once the dwarf was located, Lex would handle the remaining things himself, regardless of what they may be. Lex himself was not exactly ecstatic that Barley had shared Lex's video online for his own profit, and had not yet decided what the appropriate response should be. It was one of those things that could not be done until he was actually faced with the situation. Once Lex had given all the information, the figure simply nodded, before responding, I have recorded all the information given to me by you. Within 3 days, we will confirm whether or not we are taking this task. If we accept the task, you will need to provide full payment at the time we accept. How will you contact me? Lex asked. He was worried about having his identity traced by Hicks, not to mention he would probably need to stay on the planet for them to find him. If he returned to the inn, then even if they really were tracking him, they would never be able to find him. As soon as I leave, the card you used to summon me will be reformed. Within 3 days, a change will form on the card indicating whether we accept or reject. Once you notice the change, you will have only 1 day to go to a discreet place and send the payment, once again through the card. In the future, once we complete the task, if it is accepted, we will also contact you through the card. Such a method protects both Hicks and its clients, as no other trace of our transaction is left. If we decide to reject the task, then the card will be burned and you will need to procure a new card if you want to contact Hicks once again. This way, clients can use Hicks repeatedly without leaving any transaction history, as there is nothing else connecting us to the client. Even Hicks itself will not know who the client is. This, in turn, protects you from prosecution in the future should Hicks be compromised. Your SOPs are quite professional. I look forward to hearing from you regarding my task. Once the conversation was concluded, the figure disappeared, and the world once again regained color. On the floor, the ashes that had originally disappeared seemed to return, and formed the very card from which they came. Lex had not even reached down to pick the card up yet, let alone contemplate on the exchange he had just had, when he heard a voice from behind him. "Lex Williams, you are a very hard man to find." Surprised but not startled, Lex instantly leaped forward and turned around, ready to face a devastating enemy. After all, to be able to sneak up on him, the opponent must be extremely formidable. Yet the figure he saw did not seem like it had any intention of attacking him. There was a neat, vertical rip in space, as if sliced open with a knife, hanging in the middle of the room. The rip was being stretched open by two bony hands, revealing a skull garbed in a dark yet ethereal shroud. Around the skull there seemed to be only darkness, and even its eye sockets only revealed the void. As the hooded figure emerged, its hand disappeared, leaving being a literal floating, cloaked skull. "Please excuse me if I startled you, that was not my intention. Your various means of protection from divination made it incredibly tedious to locate you." Even as the figure had entered his room, and was talking to him, Lex could not sense him at all. Neither his instincts nor his spirit seemed to be able to pick up his presence. It was almost as if he was simply hallucinating. "Allow me to introduce myself, my name is Bacterius. I am here to extend forth an invitation to you in honor of the recognition of your recent feats. I have to say, I'm a bit of a fan not just of you, but your whole family. I don't think I've ever delivered so many invitations to people from the same nuclear family." Damien Arbin William, Lex's grandfather, gulped and loosened his collar as he looked at his ancestor, as well as his siblings, all of whom were akin to legends, especially the Emperor. Although they had all suppressed their auras, their majesty and prestige still weighed on Damien. "Please, start from the beginning. We want to hear everything. We'll also require all records you have of your son and his family, regardless of how irrelevant or mundane they may seem," said William. "My son," Damien said as he tasted the words on his lips. Their relationship had been very tumultuous from the very start, though he was too embarrassed to admit that. "From the day he was born, my son was different. He was born with the sword saint physique, making him especially suited to swordplay. He learned to wield sword intent at the age of 6, long before he started cultivation. He took 4 days to cross body tempering, around 2 weeks to cross chi training, and only 6 months to cross the foundation realm, though admittedly there was an episode that delayed his advance, so technically he could have been even faster. He'd dash." "What was the episode?" asked Jotun, interrupting Damien. "Keep in mind we want to hear everything, regardless of how ordinary it may seem." Yes, your majesty. At that time I had not yet become the family head, though I was on the path for it already. As such, I wanted my children to be trained especially for the role as well. Every 20 years, all William family members below the age of 50 can participate in a special trial. The top 15 members who pass that trial all receive the title of Paragon, and become candidates for the family head. Although they have to go through many more tests, as well as training in the future to continue to be eligible for the post, that is the first step. My son had a disagreement with a paragon, who used his authority to subsequently punish him. Since I did not want to appear partial, I did not interfere. The punishment delayed his breakthrough. "What was the punishment?" asked Nissar, the head of the Butt family. "It was nothing too serious. For 3 months he had to hide his identity and work as an attendant in one of the family businesses." "Do you have a detailed record of his experiences in those 3 months?" No I don't, but I can have them arranged." "Please do that. You may continue with your story." The brothers were being meticulous, and looking for even the smallest hint of something going awry, or something that would explain the abnormalities of the family so far in the future. But they did not know that they did not need to be so meticulous. The answer was coming. All in all, my son was a genius in cultivation and a master of swordsmanship. Everything was going relatively well until he went to a planet called Earth for a mission and met her. Damien could not help but grimace, despite being on his best behavior. What was the mission, who did he meet, and, it seems to be you skipped a lot of stuff in between. Please, go step by step. We have all the time in the world. Damien quickly gathered himself up and began the story from the beginning, detailing the life of the young prodigy that was his son. Chapter 799 Bloodline Resonance. Under the close scrutiny of his ancestor and the other absolute powerhouses, Damien was forced to reveal every excruciating detail about how unpleasant his relationship was between him and his son. In Damien's defense, he had many children of various ages, due to the fact that he himself was not that young, and his wife was a cultivator as well. The sense of familial bond was very limited between him and his children to begin with, and the fact that he ordered his children about like his subordinates, manipulating their relationship like it gave him control over them, made them even more distant. With his other children, this was not much of a problem since none of them were absurdly talented, and even now had not come close to him in power. But Leon, his most talented son and Lex's father, was an entirely different case. He was always rebellious, though not to a problematic amount. It was only when he got to Earth that the problem was exacerbated. William had already heard everything from Damien before, so he did not say anything, but the others listened intently. Leon went to Earth to fulfill a mission and deliver a political prisoner there. Since the planet was deprived of spiritual energy, it was an excellent place to hold political prisoners. We also had a few experiments running stored away on that planet which he needed to overlook. It was during his time there that he met a mortal woman, by the name of Serene. On that planet, the local calendar recorded the year as 1748, and technology and education were extremely limited. All these factors combined together meant that the woman was extremely ignorant and uneducated, without a trace or hint of any knowledge about the cultivation world. I do not know the specifics of what happened, and there's no way to get a record of it either. All I can say is that he spent a couple of decades there, with her, before disappearing. Leon's disappearance did not go without notice, as not only did it affect some of my plans, he also lost his own status as paragon and fell out of the race for family head. Of course, by then I had already gotten my own position, but I was still dissatisfied with him. Given his talent, I fully expected that he would be able to enter the heavenly immortal realm, and bring the William family on par with the other three great noble families of the Jotun Empire. Alas, it was not meant to be. When he finally reappeared, he was back on Earth. Moreover, it was not just that. He had suppressed his tenets, and entirely discarded his cultivation, dropping back down to immortal. I thought he had been attacked by an enemy, but later discovered he had done it himself to recultivate from scratch. I was beyond furious, but it was already too late. That is when I discovered that he had already married that mortal Serene, and they had a child together, Belle. Originally, I was extremely furious, until I discovered that the babe had something special about her, much like Leon himself back then. She did not have a unique physique, like Leon's. Instead, she was born with the heart of a Valkyrie. I do not know how such a thing was possible, as that was a literal organ from an entirely different race, and one much stronger than humans as well. If it could be adequately nurtured, she could grow to be extremely powerful. Angry at my own son, who would not listen to reason, I instead turned my attention to Belle. I marked her, so that I could find her anywhere in the origin realm, and informed Leon that I would take her away at the age of 8 to begin her training. Through the use of special fruits that could allow her body to strengthen adequately, I would begin her cultivation path early. Leon was furious, but as a mortal, he could do nothing to me. 8 years later, I returned and discovered my insolent son barely having entered the chi training realm. After destroying his cultivation, it was not easy to cultivate again, so I held no hope from him. I came to take Belle, but discovered another daughter Leon had, little Elizabeth. Just like her father and sister, her body was unique as well. By now, I realized something was amiss, for if it was so easy to produce offsprings with great talents, then the William family would never have declined. Elizabeth, or Liz as she called herself, had a mythical 100% affinity for the Beastmaster path. Although not as common or mainstream as cultivation, Beastmasters could not be underestimated, so I marked her as well and gave the same stipulation. Leon was once again angered, but at Chi training, what could he even do? At this point, Damien paused. None of his listeners found his actions unusual or cruel. Training descendants strictly was a common practice among cultivator families. Sending one's kids with their own grandparent could not even be considered cruel, for so many of them were shipped off to boarding schools for centuries without ever even meeting their families. That was just how the dynamic of powerful families worked. Of course, the kids or Leon may not have felt that way. But it was not as if the kids were being harmed in any way. They were just returning to their family to train. By then, my relationship with Leon had completely soured, but I was too angry at him for wasting his talents to pay much attention to it. When I returned next, I discovered he had one more daughter, named Moon. Moreover, her speciality was incredibly, unbelievable. Not only could she use her own power to heal souls, she had the potential to assist cultivators in crossing tribulations. At that point I let my greed get the better of me. Moon's ability was too amazing, and too valuable. She could not be left on Earth at all. I took her and Liz with me immediately. Leon had managed to reach the Golden Core realm, somehow, during this time. I should have noticed the anomaly, which was his growing strength, but I was too blinded by Moon's ability. What I had not realized was that while Leon was recultivating from a mortal, his wife Serene had a higher cultivation all this time. She used some unknown means to create spiritual clones of all her children, so that even if their real bodies were far away, in a way, they had a normal childhood as well, through their clones. "Is that when the infamous Moon incident took place?" asked Batu. Although they were all asking Damien questions in detail, they had already been briefed by William about the significant details. Clearly the incident with Moon was one such incident. Yes. Unfortunately, that is how I came to learn that Serene was not as simple as I had long thought. Although she was having Leon cultivate again from scratch, he had only grown stronger than his peak, not weaker, even at a lower cultivation realm. When the incident with Moon happened, her spiritual clone nearly collapsed. Leon lost his mind in anger, and that is when I found out how absurdly strong he had become. Even in his Golden Core cultivation, he was able to use his sword intent to rip open a tear in space and cross entire galaxies to reach me. If Serene had not intervened, and the ensuing fight not stopped, it may have resulted in me being critically injured, and Leon dead. Even after the interruption, it was not as if we managed to escape unharmed. The last time I saw Leon, he had reached the nascent realm. That was also the time when I discovered an anomaly in the treasure that records the family tree, as the name Lex Williams had suddenly appeared on it. All this time, and I never knew that he even had a son, let alone that he had grown so much. At that time, I really felt that if I challenged Leon, he would be able to kill me, so I didn't push the topic too hard. All this time, I was wondering what made Lex so special, that Leon managed to hide his son from the family treasure. It must not have been an easy achievement. But a few weeks ago, when I saw that video of Lex climbing that dragon, Damien did not finish his sentence, as the immense stress he felt caused him to rub his forehead. Although he did not know much about this grandson of his, he really hoped that he did not have the same anger problems Leon had. Based on the information I have collected on Leon and his children, especially Lex, I may have come to a conclusion about why he especially was hidden from sight, said William very calmly. Before I mention my theory to everyone, I would like to emphasize that I strongly believe that Lex Williams has a very strong connection to the Midnight Inn, so no one should think about making any moves against him, for now at least. William especially looked at his siblings when he said this. Some time ago, I experienced an abnormality in my ability, gelid anima, and actually developed a hint of a bloodline. Such a thing should not really be possible. But following the pattern of Leon having kids with mythical abilities that have only been recorded in legend, and never witnessed, I discovered one particular ability that could explain what happened to me, given that Lex was nearby at the time. It is called bloodline resonance. Damien seemed ignorant of what those words meant, but the rest of them were startled. Chapter 800 Pride. Lightsville. Hey, that's not the kind of stuff you should be saying randomly, said Jotun, although he was more than inclined to believe his brother. After all, analytical deduction was William's strong suit, and he had more or less been responsible for developing the Empire's growth strategies. It could not be said to be flawless, but considering the massive scale of the Empire, he could not really be blamed. It's just a theory. But the thing that I can't decide is that if he really does have bloodline resonance, should we set our sights on him, or his abnormal parents who are able to achieve such a thing? What's bloodline resonance? Damien could not help but ask, but regretted it immediately. Due to the casual attitude the brothers adopted, he forgot his position and status. The 5 brothers could not be blamed. They had a good relationship with each other, and had been like this since they were young. They were brothers spending time together, with all their other identities put aside. But did others really have the qualification to treat them casually as well? The 5 brothers looked at Damien, and realized that they were not really done questioning him. Although he had described Leon's life so far, now he had to inform them about the 3 sisters and how they were trained. Bloodline resonance, you don't need to worry about it too much. Just think of it as the key for the human race as a whole to move up on the cosmic ascendance spectrum. It is no wonder he would gain the protection of an entity like the Midnight Inn. I am now beginning to suspect that the name on the top of the guest registry really is him, as if he has been using the resonance, then that really is an achievement few can compete with. But these things are none of your concern. Now tell us about Belle. Lex looked at Bacterius and did not drop his guard, but in fact raised it higher instead. That was because he tried to use targeted scan on him, but failed. The failure of the system's ability likely meant that Bacterius was not really here, or that he had some means to avoid the system's abilities. The first option was the most likely, but he could not discount the second either. What is the invitation for? What does this have to do with my family? He asked. It was too suspicious for someone to just appear and start mentioning his family. Moreover, he really was not a fan of how these unbelievably powerful beings just dropped in on him without him being able to detect them. The invitation has nothing to do with your family, be assured of that. No one's lineage or background can assure an invitation. Only a display showing strength far outside your own realm is the bare minimum requirement to get such an invitation. It is only the bare minimum requirement, mind you. I have already investigated Fragra thoroughly, so I can assure you that your invitation is much higher ranked than the bare minimum. I must say, like father like son. Your old man also dealt with a dragon back when he was in the Golden Core realm, though he managed to kidnap it using his own abilities, and then later killed it in secret with his own strength as well. Your achievement of climbing a soulless corpse falls a little short of that, but then again, you were faced with a heavenly immortal corpse, while your old man only dealt with an earth immortal. So it's understandable if there is a difference in performance. Bacterius seemed to enjoy teasing Lex, giving him only the bare minimum information without extrapolating further. He grinned, and continued telling his story. By the way, as this is my job, don't think for a second that I did not do it thoroughly. I also discovered how you resisted an attack from an earth immortal down in Pulbitvi, which is impressive for a golden core cultivator, but is not enough to fulfill the minimum requirement. Speaking of which, your mother's invitation was only the minimum requirement. Unfortunately, neither your father nor your mother were interested in attending this little event. Lex pursed his lips as he was forced to listen to information about his family. Since they had kept so many secrets from him, and chose to not involve him in their lives, he had decided to ignore them as well. Now, suddenly receiving so much information about them made him feel uncomfortable, assuming it was all true of course. Your sister has a bit of an attitude problem, by the way. I was telling her all this as well, and she just attacked me. Just because she was able to kill an angel and absorb its bloodline to create her own does not mean she can just do whatever she wants. I think attacking you might really be the only way to make you get to the point, Lex said, his mood deteriorating. If you do not want to talk about what this invitation is for, then I suggest you just leave. I don't think I'm much interested in it either. Against this enigmatic foe, Lex did not hesitate to use dominate, and noticed something peculiar. Not only could he tell that dominate was affecting Bacterius, although he was too strong for it to produce any tangible results, he could sense him with his instincts now as well. So dominate could work on collaboration with other abilities as well. I see impatience as a family trait, Bacterius said, not at all perturbed by Lex's demeanor. It's quite simple really. The invitation for a tournament, of sorts. The best, and I mean the absolute best, from the entire realm are being gathered. The purpose of this tournament is actually to determine if you are qualified to take part in a much larger, much more rewarding tourney. Yes, of course, there will be prizes and rewards and many opportunities for you to come in contact with the highest levels in this realm. But the main thing is, you can compete against anyone else who is considered the best, and see how you match up. So, are you interested? I can feel a lot of pride in you. Do you dare to test that pride?